crush your enemies.
They drew first blood, not me.
See them driven before you.
Oh, my user.
And hear the lamentation of your women.
But I pity the fool.
Glitter in the dark near the 10-house gate.
Phone home.
They're here.
Oh, real light sleeper, child.
Welcome to Vintage Video, where we're rewatching the 80s so you don't have to. We'll be reviewing every major film release of the 1980s in chronological order, overanalyzing what you've seen and spoiling what you haven't. I'm Patrick O'Reilly.
I'm Jesse Bayless.
I'm Richard Wells.
I'm Mike Sterling.
And today we're discussing Swamp Thing, released February 19th, 1982. It was written by Wes Craven, based on the comic series by Len Wein and Bernie Wrightson, and directed by Wes Craven, and released by Embassy Pictures domestically and United Artists overseas through their foreign distribution arm, United International Pictures. And in case I make any mistakes today, we've brought back our comic book expert to correct me wherever I'm wrong here.
I'll jump in whenever you need me to.
Mike is our good friend. He came back from, what was the last episode we had you on? It was
Heavy Metal.
Heavy Metal.
Yes.
And you had specifically asked to come back for this one because you're a big fan.
Swamp Thing is my favorite comic book character. I have pretty much every appearance of him in American comics, and now I'm trying to collect foreign reprints of him.
Is there a current run of the Swamp Thing comics, or is it?
There is no currently running Swamp Thing series at the moment, but he's been popping up an awful lot in various other comics.
That makes sense. Do you have a lot of his guest appearances too, probably?
Oh, yeah. I've got an enormous number of cameo appearances. I have one panel appearances of him in comics. It's pretty ridiculous.
Very cool.
This is not a healthy thing I should be doing.
All right, well, let's get started then. For the comic beginnings of the character, Swamp Thing appeared first in The House of Secrets, number 92, July 1971, which you brought along with you today.
I did. I showed you my copy of it, and I made sure none of you touched it with your filthy hands. But it was, at the time, according to Len Wein, it was DC's top-selling comic of that month. So it really hit a chord with people when it was released.
Very cool. In that issue, his human name was Alex Olson, and he was competing with his best friend Damian Ridge for the heart of a woman named Linda. Alex won her heart and hand in marriage, but Damian never got over it and sabotaged Alex's laboratory, causing his death by explosion, and later marrying Alex's widow. But in a sort of telltale heart pattern, Damian became convinced that Linda would learn what he had done and made plans to kill her, but those plans were thwarted by Swamp Thing. The resurrected form of his friend Alex Olson mutated in the explosion. Despite his successful rescue, Linda doesn't recognize her former husband in the Swamp Thing and flees in horror.
An interesting thing about that particular story is Len Wein said that he never intended to call the character Swamp Thing at first.
Oh, really?
He was just, when he was working on this story, he just referred to it as, oh, it's that Swamp Thing story I'm working on. And when it came time to finally title the story, he said, well, Swamp Thing's as good as the name of his enemy.
Sure, yeah.
So that's what he ended up with.
Now, I don't have notes on this, but I seem to recall someone mentioning that Len Wein was like roommates with the guy who was developing Man-Thing with Marvel.
Jerry Conway.
And they came out within like a year of each other.
Very close to each other, just
okay.
a few months, but nobody thinks that there was any sort of collusion or
like nobody
peeking
blames
over
anybody.
shoulders. No, it was just horror comics were just kind of in at the time.
Right.
And this wasn't even the first swamp monster in comics.
Really?
There was one in the 40s called The Heap. Who was
That's a cool name.
He was a World War I German fighter pilot who crashed in a swamp.
Oh, okay.
And rose up again.
And he had some chemicals on board that...
I forget. The origin changes over the course of the issues at the time. I actually own hardcover books that collect this entire series.
Yeah. And
his origin was altered repeatedly because I guess they figured,
nobody knows.
No one's going to pay attention. This same kid won't be reading this comic, 6 months from now, so he can do whatever.
Did Man-Thing continue on for an extended period of time? Because it doesn't have any movies or TV shows, does it?
Oh, he does.
He does?
He does.
Oh, okay.
Man-Thing first appeared in a magazine called Savage Tales, so it was a one-shot story.
Yeah.
And then he continued on, made a couple appearances in other comics. Then he started appearing in an anthology book called Fear, and then he ended up in his own title for a number of issues, running roughly about the same time as the Swamp Thing series did.
I'm just remembering now, I think that there's like a sort of a vague reference to Man-Thing in Iron Man 3.
There's a reference to the woman who was involved in his origin.
Because it's like her husband or something has the same name as Man-Thing.
I forget the exact details, but she had the same name as, I think, the lady who meets up with Ted Sallis. That's Man-Thing's real name.
Yeah.
In the origin story. I think that's what it is. I don't quote me on that, but there is a very minor reference.
Yeah, she's like one of the extremist patients or something like that.
Then Man-Thing he had a TV movie in the 2000s at some point, and then there was the Disney Plus Halloween special, Werewolf by Night, and Man-Thing is in that as well.
Oh. I never saw that, actually.
Actually, it's pretty good.
I've heard good things. It's black and white, right? And
it's black and white, and then they did a colorized version of it later. The Man-Thing in there looks very much like the Man-Thing from the comics, but it's not really the same type of character. The Man-Thing in the comics is entirely mindless, driven only by other people's emotions. He reacts to other people's emotions.
Okay.
Whereas the Man-Thing in Werewolf by Night has some kind of brain power.
Okay.
A little more brain power than normal.
I'm just going to hold out hope for the Heap movie. We need that one to happen.
The Heap, they did revive the Heap for a comic in the 70s. So,
okay.
So,
And for Fraggles.
There you go. That's right. The big garbage heap.
Yeah.
Right.
Swamp Thing was granted his first dedicated series in 1972, now renamed Alec Holland. The first half was written by Len Wein and drawn by Bernie Wrightson. And over the course of that first series, his wife Linda is killed. He is transformed, and he sets forth avenging her and unmutating himself. From the beginning, mad scientist Anton Arcane has been a major villain in the series. In his efforts to replicate Swamp Thing, he develops an army of mutant creatures he calls Unmen.
Yes. He actually isn't called Anton Arcane until 1985.
It's just Arcane?
It's just Arcane. He isn't given a first name until the second Swamp Thing annual for the second series.
I think that's also the case for the films. I think they just call him Arcane.
He's just Arcane in the films.
And then they call him Anton in the second film.
Yes, because by that point, the character's been given a name.
That makes sense.
But the original Swamp Thing series, for at least for most of the issues, a lot of the stories focused around various horror tropes.
Right.
Like here's the Frankenstein issue, here's the witch issue, here's the zombie issue.
Yeah. It's the perfect location for zombie stuff, too, because you got all the Bayou black magic stuff.
And Arcane was the mad scientist type, where he wanted Swamp Thing's, bulking body to replace his old withered body.
Right, okay.
So he can exact his revenge on
one of those stories.
Yeah, it's one of those things,
Like the Witch's Brew thing that we covered.
We're going to have to come back to that Arcane in the second movie thing at the end because...
Right?
Oh, I got things to say about the second movie.
we got stuff to say here. In that first run, Swamp Thing meets and falls for Arcane's niece, Abigail Arcane, and he is often hunted by her husband, his former friend, who blames him for the reported deaths of Alec and Linda. By the end of that series, Holland transforms back into a man, but he needs to constantly medicate himself to avoid reverting back to the Swamp Thing form.
That's not exactly...
Okay,
right?
yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, that's why you're here.
Cable and Abby don't get married until the second series.
Okay.
Abby, they might have some slight romantic interest in each other, but but they weren't married. At the end of the series, they introduce Alec Holland's brother, who is supposedly an even better biochemist than he was, and he basically cures Alec.
Yeah.
And turns him back into human. But as that issue and the final issue progress, he's obviously having reactions or something that's affecting his body. He's like in pain or he feels cramps or stuff. And then by the time the unpublished 25th issue rolls around, the artwork for which has been discovered and printed in one of the trade paperbacks, he basically will spontaneously churn into Swamp Thing, but he'll be a mindless monster. It's kind of like a Hulk story.
So it's a Hulk situation.
Basically a Hulk story, yeah. In the comics that were printed after that Swamp Thing series ended, Swamp Thing appeared in Challengers of the Unknown, which was another series published by DC. And in that series, Alec eventually reverts back into Swamp Thing as the cure is sort of reverts itself and fails on him.
Yeah. So is he still working on a cure at that point, or has he just come to terms with the Swamp Thing form?
He's kind of still looking for a cure.
But in the same way that the Hulk is, where he's like, I'm fine being, smart Hulk.
Yeah. Well, he's trying to find a cure, but that's always taking a back seat to whatever shenanigans he finds himself in.
He's too busy.
Yeah, he's very busy.
As far as I know, that was all that existed of the character before the film adaptation. Is that correct?
He made an appearance in Brave and the Bold, which was the Batman team-up book.
Right.
He made an appearance in an issue of DC Comics Presents early on.
And did either of those appearances make any changes to his mythology, or it was just like
No.
a cameo situation?
No, they were just team-ups.
Yeah.
They didn't really add anything to the Swamp Thing story. It was just here Swamp Thing and Batman or Swamp Thing and Superman have a meeting, and then that's kind of it.
I would love to see that on screen. I want to see like them interacting with each other, because I feel like even being aware, like vaguely aware as a kid of what Swamp Thing was and what he looked like, I never even considered the fact that he was in the same universe as the Justice League, and it would just be so fun to see them interacting directly.
Well, in issue number 7 of the original series, Batman does appear.
Yeah, I was reading that. Yeah.
There's a full crossover between Batman and Swamp Thing in that issue.
That's awesome.
There is one other minor appearance where there's an issue of Super Friends based on a cartoon where there's a bunch of people dressed up in costumes at a Halloween party. Someone's dressed as Swamp Thing, someone's dressed as other characters, and then a evil magician basically casts a spell on them, and
to turn them into those
people.
Oh,
so
okay.
that's kind of a Swamp Thing appearance.
Sure, yeah. It's a technicality. There's a little asterisk.
Yes. And then there is one more Batman Brave and the Bold appearance later on, which is right about the time the first or the second Swamp Thing series starts.
Right. And so that second series was released to coincide with the release of the film.
Yes.
And that led to, by its 20th issue, they had brought on a then unknown or relatively unknown Alan Moore to take over the series, because at that point they basically thought, nobody cares about Swamp Thing anymore, so do whatever you want, and we're going to throw this away when you're done. And he completely turned it around.
Well, what I had heard even prior to Alan Moore coming on, Swamp Thing wasn't selling very well.
Right.
The store I used to shop at, and the one I eventually ended up working at, the owner of that shop would tell me that he'd order like 3 copies, he'd keep one, I'd get one more would go into the back issues.
Just in case someone asked for it.
Yes. And I had gone to another shop where someone there had told me, oh, it's about to go bi-monthly, which means it's probably on its way to being canceled.
Oh, okay.
I don't know how true that was, but when Alan Moore came on, word of mouth built around it really quickly.
Well, that's crazy too, because
awards.
This is before Moore started doing all of his big stuff, so
yeah,
it was just right away the story was that much better than what they had been doing, I guess.
Oh, Alan Moore came on and really upturned everything.
And I know about like the big twist that is reflected in the 2019 version. We'll talk about some of that later. But the other thing that I thought was cool about it is because of how undervalued it was at the time, that's why they were able to make this movie, is because it was kind of a failing comic, and this one guy had a specific passion for 2 characters, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But this was the one he was more excited about. The other one turned out to be the more profitable purchase. But it's very cool that Alan Moore did this like to make the name for himself, and then went on to things like V for Vendetta and The Watchmen, like the big, huge celebrated things.
Well, he he wrote a lot of comics for British publishers.
Oh, okay.
And that's how DC sort of found him, was they're doing like a talent search, I guess, and he was one of the people they contacted.
Very cool.
I believe that's how it worked.
Yeah, that makes sense. Michael Uslan was a former comic writer and attorney who had somehow managed to buy the film rights to both Swamp Thing comics and the supposedly worthless film rights to the Batman comics, which had been significantly cheapened by the Adam West TV and film adaptations. And Uslan hired Wes Craven to write a script on the strength of his work on Deadly Blessing the previous year, which we covered and enjoyed. It's a fun early Craven film. Craven was not aware of Swamp Thing as a character at the time, but he was fascinated by the premise when he did read through the series. For budgetary reasons, the decision was made to shoot in an actual South Carolina swamp.
As opposed to
somewhere in Los Angeles would have been their alternative, and they didn't have access to a studio that they could fully transform into a believable swamp.
That would have been something.
But I think that the second film does use a lot of soundstage swamp.
I think that sounds so miserable. Trying to film
shooting on a real
swamp.
Yeah, for sure. There's all sorts of other problems too. An unfortunate side effect of this particular location was tannic acid, which was secreted by the local trees, and it ate through everyone's costumes and clothes. So they had to constantly be treated for things, and they would get rashes and stuff like that. Despite an intent to have Ray Wise perform the Swamp Thing role in costume for the full film, the actor had trouble emoting through all the thick prosthetics of the face, so it was decided that his stunt double, Dick Durock, would perform all of the Swamp Thing scenes, but dubbed over by Wise. I think Wise is doing the voice for this film. Or is that not the case?
I Honestly, I don't know. I don't know if that was wise because they had intended for Dick Durock to be the full body outfit,
Right.
and then have Wise for the close-ups and
Inserts.
the dialogue.
But it was a terrible match, and I
Yeah.
guess he couldn't make any like emotion believable through these weird, the lines across his cheeks and stuff.
Right. But I don't know if that was Ray Wise's voice or not.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Durock obviously had to take frequent breaks to avoid succumbing to heat exhaustion in the costume because you're shooting in a swamp in South Carolina.
And it looks just like it's just thick rubber, almost like a
Yeah.
wetsuit.
Yeah,
Look,
this
it's
first
so
suit
miserable.
is pretty rough.
Yeah, and it was actually designed for a slightly larger actor who was,
was it?
who was supposed to play the character instead of Durock, but he dropped out for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And they didn't have the money to redesign the costume.
Yeah.
So it's a tiny bit saggy on him. I mean, Dick
is.
Durock is a big guy,
Right.
But the other guy was a little more like muscular and filled out the costume a little bit more.
Well, you can tell in the second movie that it's a custom costume for him because it looks so much better already by the second film.
It's a lot better.
But the 2019 one is so good. It's crazy. I really, really loved it.
But that original costume, I'm sure we'll bring it up several times during the course of this podcast. But yes, it was kind of hard to look at sometimes, but not always, which is interesting.
Sometimes he's not even recognizable as the Swamp Thing. He looks more like just kind of like a soggy creature from the Black Lagoon. So far, the film has been followed by a sequel film in '89, a 3-season series in 1990, a 5-episode animated series in '91, a single-season series in 2019, and a Swamp Thing cameo in Season 3, Episode 5 of Harley Quinn, entitled It's a Swamp Thing. He also has little bit appearances in the Teen Titans Go to the Movies feature, and he's made appearances on the show, obviously, and lots of other Justice League shows. I watched a clip from Justice League Action today, and our friend Jason did the voice of Superman on that show. And so I got to watch a scene where our friend Jason is fighting with Swamp Thing. Like it's like a canon fight with Swamp Thing. That's so awesome. But we'll discuss all those projects at the end because I watched nearly all of it. Everything
dear.
but the 1990 series. I couldn't finish 72 episodes of Swamp Thing for this one episode.
I mean, we watched like 5 minutes of that one together, and I
Yeah.
don't blame you for not.
No, that's the
watching.
2019 one. That's the good one.
No. We watched some of the other one together.
Oh, did
too.
you?
Yeah.
Did you watch that with me? Oh, okay.
The only thing I remember about the animated series was the theme song.
Oh,
Yeah,
dear.
well, see, I thought we were just making a dumb joke whenever we brought up Swamp Thing and we were saying, oh, who's Swamp Thing? Oh, he makes your heart sing. And it's like, no, that was actually the joke of the animated series. They literally did a parody of Wild Thing with the Swamp Thing lyrics.
Swamp Thing, you are amazing. You fight everything nasty. Swamp Thing.
It's pretty bad.
I would put that theme song on mixed discs for people. Yes.
Yeah. That's great. We open logically in a swamp with a paragraph of prologue, or I guess maybe log, because it's not setting up the story. It's just summarizing the entire film in a paragraph. Not long ago, in the unexplored reaches of an unmapped swamp, the creative genius of one man collided with another's evil dream, and a monster was born. Then we wipe transition to a second swamp shot and a second page of text. Too powerful to be destroyed, too intelligent to be captured, this being still pursues its savage dream. It's like, this should have been at the end of the movie, right?
Spoiler, he does get captured.
That's true. But he does it on purpose, we find out later.
Oh, yes.
The only way out is through.
So throughout the movie, we do a lot of those cheesy wipes.
Yes.
So they're
Yes.
and there's all sorts of ones. I mean, I don't think we get a star wipe in there, but we get just about everything.
Pretty
else.
close. There's an
Yeah.
explosion wipe that's
Yeah.
very close to a star. Too many points to be a star wipe.
Yeah. There's like a goopy curtain
Yeah,
wipe.
a
like
slime
that
wipe.
one.
Yeah.
Yes.
It almost looks like a Mario 3 curtain dropping down.
Yeah. This needed like you said, a star wipe or a heart wipe.
Yeah.
Craven does say in the commentary track he purposefully did that to kind of reflect the comic book origins.
It
Yeah.
comes through. I
think it
understood
serves
the,
that purpose.
The intent.
Yes.
My only problem is that the first couple of them are like a dissolve wipe, where it's kind of like fading from one to the other instead of a solid line. So it's like the way they do them in Star Wars. They do like, there's like a dissolve in the wipe, but then suddenly there's one that goes diagonal with a solid line, and I feel like they all should have been solid line wipes.
Yeah.
And that's the way Ang Lee did it in his Hulk movie too, is that he did a lot of wipes like that were supposed to emulate like comic book panels.
But he also did those multi-panel.
Right, he did that. Yeah.
Oh, I also wanted to mention that it's nice that they used the actual comic book logo.
Right, yeah, I have that note too, yeah.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, it's really nice to see that.
Yeah. The title card Swamp Thing is presented in the same font as the comics, which I always appreciate.
Yes.
So, yeah, same point.
Okay.
More vertical wipes as the credits play out over more swamp shots. Lots of horror royalty from titles we've already covered. We have Adrienne Barbeau from The Fog, David Hess from Last House on the Left, same director, obviously. Nicholas Worth from Don't Answer the Phone. He's the maniac from Don't Answer the Phone. Music here from Harry Manfredini, whose legendary Friday the 13th score had me listening for echoes of swamp, 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 thing, 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 thing. But it didn't happen.
I do own the soundtrack album for this film.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it's very nice.
A Coast Guard helicopter descends into the swamp with Alice Cable on board, played by the lovely Adrienne Barbeau. Alice is an invention of the script and an amalgamation of the comic's husband and wife characters Abby Arcane and Matthew Joseph Cable, though Abby does appear in the second film, played by Heather Locklear, but we'll come back to that. She asks her escort Charlie for local food recommendations.
Depends. If you're a human, it's back in Washington. But if you're a gator, it could be right where we land.
So I guess she's coming directly from Washington?
Apparently,
Yeah.
in the comics, Matt Cable is a government agent, so yeah, it makes sense.
From down in the swamp, we watch the chopper pass by, and then a team of commandos, apparently hiding from the camera specifically, appear from behind a row of trees to infiltrate the area. The leader of this pack is credited as Ferret and played by David Hess.
Ferret is also
From the comics?
In the first issue of the Swamp Thing ongoing series, two of the thugs that come to harass Alec Holland and Linda Holland in their lab are Bruno and Ferret.
Okay, so both names come from the comic. That's
both
great.
names come from the comic. They're totally different characters,
Sure.
but that's where the names come from.
The chopper touches down and Alice and friends disembark. Charlie mentions that Dr. Holland insisted on building his lab out here.
He said this is where the life is. One of those life forms nailed the guy you're replacing.
Now, I don't know if that means killed or just attacked. I guess we don't really go any further into
Yeah,
that.
I mean, it's also pretty impressive. This helicopter lands wheels out.
Right.
And I was like, I don't know if I would have done that. If it's one of those Coast Guard helicopters that's designed to float.
Yeah.
It just seems like I think you're better off not putting those wheels down into the mud.
Because you don't know if you're going to be able to lift back out of it. You just lose a shoe.
I don't know if he meant that the guy who was nailed. I don't know if that means that.
I mean, we know he didn't die on scene because he was at least transported to a hospital. So I'm assuming he was just injured.
Okay. I was wondering if maybe Arcane's guys got him or something.
Yeah, who knows?
Yeah.
A small boat glides up to the chopper, and a man trades places with Alice, but not before criticizing the new recruit.
What, they sent a woman out here? Where the hell are you going? Couldn't take it anymore. Well, he lasted longer than most.
The outgoing sexist guy here is actually actor Dick Durock, who will play the titular Swamp Thing later in the film. Nearby, a man wearing a badge, possibly a scientist, stalks the swamp with a gun in silent pursuit of the commando team, but he's ambushed by Ferret and disarmed. Ferret slips a machete out, and the man books it into the trees, but everywhere he turns, his path is blocked by more armed men in fatigues and face paint. They hold him down, and then, in place of the machete we just saw him withdrawing, Ferret starts to yank a live snake out of his pocket.
Yeah, that doesn't seem safe.
No. The book specifies this is a cottonmouth specifically,
Right.
so I guess Ferret was not happy to see me. Even his fellow commandos are disturbed by the move. They hold him tight, and Ferret lets the snake bite the man's face. He screams, and we cut to birds making similar screeches around Alice's boat ride. Charlie tells her the swamp is supposedly haunted, and they pull up to the laboratory.
So this attack makes me think that the last guy had a similar treatment.
Oh, that's
because they
possible.
said that he got, nailed or whatever by
Ferret snuck up
something
and
from the
pulled a
swamp.
gator out of his pocket.
Yeah, well, maybe not a gator, but the fact that he got attacked by something in the swamp makes me feel like they're showing us how he got attacked.
That makes sense. Charlie tells her the swamp is supposedly haunted, and they pull up to the laboratory. Charlie says it used to be a church. For a structure full of highly specialized technical equipment, they don't even bother to close all the doors to the swamp. It reminds me of that room in Mr. Burns' nuclear power plant with the rickety screen door.
Yeah.
He has to chase the dog out.
No, for God's sake.
Alice asks if Holland is upset that Washington has ordered them to return from the swamp to the capital, and Charlie's not even sure he knows yet. Charlie leads her inside and tries to mansplain some of the equipment, but she cuts him off.
You probably haven't seen half this stuff. It's all new. Take this, for instance. This is a laser.
Laser-induced subsonic field generator. Gives double readings in the 3200 band, right? I got a trick for fixing that.
She asks what Holland is working on out there, and Charlie tells her that it's all apparently some big secret. She notices an alarm on their security board in Sector 3, but Charlie has already wandered back outside and doesn't hear the warning. We cut outside, where Snakebite Faceman is stumbling through the water and collapses face first into the swamp. Back at the lab, in air quotes, Alice, who people seem to be referring to mostly by her last name Cable, is introduced to the project field supervisor, Harry Ritter. She tells him about the alarm, but he assumes it's a malfunction, and the guy doesn't seem surprised either. He says the water here is rotting everything to pieces, and so probably a reference to the tannic acid issues that they were having on set. Charlie tells Ritter that Washington wants Holland and their special formula back to town immediately.
Anything wrong that you know of? A rumor. Somebody's heard Arcane's gotten wind of the project.
I thought Arcane was dead.
He is. Who said that? Who said Arcane's onto this?
Nobody's taking credit for it. You know Washington.
Ritter points out that if Holland finds out Arcane is pursuing the formula, he might shut this whole operation down.
I do like that they give Arcane sort of a backstory here.
Right.
That, Arcane's this guy who's been around harassing all of us for ages. They do set up in the book. I don't know if you're going to mention
about Arcane prior to the story?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't have anything.
It's mostly they refer to him as he's kind of like a corrupt industrialist.
Okay.
Who apparently manipulated through secret holdings or whatever to get Alec Holland here into the swamp.
Oh, okay.
That's established in the novelization.
So in the movie, he picked this location himself, but in the book, in the novelization, he was kind of manipulated into doing that. Like he was incepted.
Yeah.
Okay.
He was through money and through various arrangements. He kind of got Alec Holland where he wanted him.
Okay.
And this is, like I said, this is a novelization. This isn't from the comic.
Right.
The comic's a whole different thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I also, I've mentioned it, I think, on our Raiders of the Lost Ark podcast, but there's a really great podcast called I Read Movies. It's hosted by someone named Paxton Hawley, and he reads novelizations that were based on movies, and then he does a whole podcast talking about every single change from the movie to the book and vice versa, and maybe reasons for those changes. And it's really, really interesting podcast. But I'll mention that a few more times as we go through this because there were a few interesting changes and a few interesting just extra details. Next, Ritter and Charlie lead Cable to the more secure bunker on the site. An external fingerprint scanner permits only 5 people inside. These 3 and the Hollands, Alec and Linda. Inside, they find the Hollands working in a 2-story lab full of computers and plants with a sort of greenhouse partition. Now, maybe 30 seconds after, he said,
All it takes is one loudmouth to spill this to Holland, and the whole project goes to hell in a handbasket. You know that?
He stands 10 feet away from Holland and loudly shouts,
I want to hear everything about the Arcane business now.
Ritter and Charlie disappear to a neighboring room to discuss the rumors. Cable reminds them about the Sector 3 alarm, and Charlie says she can inspect it personally.
Me? In the swamps?
She approaches the Hollands, who are standing around a trough full of water and reaching through the mossy surface in search of something.
Lose a contact lens?
Funny.
Dr. Alec Holland invites Cable to join the search. He says he dropped a Cooper's digger, which she assumes is some kind of tool, until Alec yanks out a mutant opossum named Alessandro by its tail.
I have so many questions.
All right, let's hear them.
Okay. I assume, correct me if I'm wrong, a Cooper's digger is not a real thing.
I Googled it and I couldn't find that it was an actual species. It sounds enough like a real species of opossum that maybe I wasn't aware of. It's not.
Okay.
So if you Google Cooper's digger, you're going to get the wiki page about this Swamp Thing creature, which can breathe underwater. If you were worried about
possums can breathe underwater.
A Cooper's digger with their genetic mutated host can breathe underwater.
Oh, is that what
That's
this
why
is
it's breathing
implying?
underwater. Yes.
Okay, but the actual animal cannot.
Yes, on set, that animal, they created one that can breathe underwater. It's like the abyss.
I'm just super bothered by the fact that because this thing is sopping wet when they pull it.
Yeah, but I think he literally just put it under the water and then lifted it up for the shot. They wouldn't hold it under there for 3 minutes. Be like, well, we want you to be a method opossum.
That's where all the budget went, was making this possum. Yes.
Training a possum to hold its breath. The mammalian dive
the
reflex.
Worst thing to do in the world.
But that makes more sense. If you're saying that the things that they've done to this possum makes it an aquatic animal.
Yeah, they're altering its genetics in some way, I believe. Because they talk
otherwise-
about it having a specific host that does something for it. And the wiki page...
It is a host or it...
That's what confused me, because I would think that if it's smaller than it and it's riding along on it, that would make it a parasite, not a host. But he says that they're going to make the next formula from the host they got off of Alessandro.
So the thing on it is a host. So
Somehow.
he's a host for another host for something that they're making?
I don't know.
I think they just misused the word.
Yeah.
Because it's supposed to be like a single-celled something or other
that's just in its body, giving
Right.
it powers.
But,
Yeah.
inside its body, not just on it.
I
Because I
don't
thought
know.
they said it lived on its fur, and I'm like, how is this thing? Because they're very casual about the fact that there's a mammal underwater, and they're just like, I'm just gonna dig around here. Maybe it's under some rocks. I'm like, if
Yeah,
there's
that's the
if
weirdest
there's a
line.
mammal sitting under rocks in
He
a
says,
basin of
check
water,
under the rocks. It's like, did you drop a rock on a possum in the middle of this tank? That's pretty fucked up.
I feel like they could have just corrected all this by just having it be like a turtle or a frog or something.
Yeah.
But I think
But
that
that's not as mystical and confusing when they pull it up.
But I also feel like it contributes later to the transformations that we
Yes.
see.
Yeah.
So I think that what it is important here.
Yeah. Mm.
But it's still a very bizarre scene that
Yeah.
leaves me with a lot of questions.
Alec carries the animal across the lab, and Cable extends a handshake to Linda Holland and asks if they're members of Holland's team. It would be weird if they were in this bunker and they weren't members of Holland's team. But Ritter also just told you 5 seconds ago that the only other 2 people with access to the lab were the Hollands.
I'm Linda Holland. You're Dr. Holland. I'm a Dr. Holland, but not the Dr. Holland. Boy, genius, and oddball.
You're still Dr. Holland.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oftentimes, I think we see this trope where somebody's like, "Oh, you're the doctor," like because they don't make that assumption,
Right.
that a woman's going to be the doctor that we're talking about. But here they kind of take it one step further,
Yeah.
where she makes that assumption. Oh, you're the doctor. Oh, wait, you're not the doctor.
He's like, I'm technically a doctor, I guess. I did get my doctorate, but you're talking about him. Okay.
That's Alec. He's the brains in the family. I just cook up what he invents.
Alec is quick to downplay her praise and to compliment Linda's own intelligence before assigning her the task of working on an adjustment to their formula. And this is where he says, use the host from Alessandro's fur and make the next round of the formula. Alec offers to accompany Cable to check on the misfiring sensor in Sector 3. She suggests bringing Charlie along, but Alec pokes fun.
Maybe we could ask your mother to come along, too. Come on. The only dangerous thing out there are those government agents with their pop guns.
Out on the swamp, Cable asks about the guy she's replacing here, and he tells her not to blame the alligator that attacked the guy because alligators are naturally carnivores and scientists are naturally delicious. Cable is still not excited to be out here because her boots weren't made for swamping. But maybe she's upset that she lost the fake mustache from her Weird Al costume. Alec presents her with an orchid and starts talking about the beauty of nature and of her own natural anatomy.
Take a look into your own body, one of God's most magnificent creations, and what do you see? Straight lines and deodorant and chrome and formica? No. You see blood and bone, pump and flow, and a million messy miracles. I mean, just look at the most creative thing a man and a woman can do together, and you'll see something growing, unpredictable, magical, hot.
Just save the malarkey for your wife, Holland.
Cable is eager to complete the task at hand, and Alec points her to a giant camo blow pop that is the Sector 3 sensor.
Camo blow pop.
Yeah, it's perfect. She opens the shell, and when she finds the parts vaguely disassembled, they toss all the components into the swamp for some reason and then head back to the base. It's like, don't you care about nature? What are you doing? You just dumped a bunch of circuit boards in the swamp and turn around? Now we get a diagonal wipe transition with a solid line, which is how I think they all should have looked to emulate comic book panels. When they get back, Ritter has blown a gasket about Cable seemingly kidnapping their lead scientist, but Alec claims all responsibility. They tell him about the sabotaged sensor, and Ritter claims it's the one Hank was working on when the gator got him. And of course, he didn't have time to reassemble it as they rushed him to the hospital. Maybe you could have saved us the whole trek out there by mentioning that the first time I told you that the Sector 3 sensor was malfunctioning.
But apparently, he had enough time to nicely put it back.
Tucked it all back in the ball.
Into the little ball and stand it up in the swamp, take it apart. She didn't even do that here.
Yeah, she just tossed it in the water.
In the water.
It's like, it looked like a plug-and-play system. Like, you could have just, snapped it all back together and put it back up.
One thing I wanted to mention about this encampment
Yeah.
is that in the comics, it's just Linda and Alec working in a barn.
Right.
And Matt Cable is the security. He's just,
right,
driving the perimeter or whatever.
But it's just the three of them?
It's just the three of them. So it's a much larger operation here in the film, which I thought was interesting.
Charlie mentions another missing team member, Ronnie, and asks Alec and Cable if they saw anybody out there. Presumably Ronnie is Snakebite Face Man, currently sucking in swamp water for air face down in the muck. The actor, by the way, is not credited on screen or IMDb, and people can't agree on who plays him. So that's a mystery for you, the listeners, to solve. Suddenly, the sound of a loud explosion sends everyone scattering, and inside the lab, they find the source.
Linda, are you all right?
It's okay, it's okay.
Linda has processed the new formula Alec requested from the host that was implanted in Alessandro's fur. She's holding a beaker full of fluid that glows bright green, and Richard's brought a very similar beaker here today. I'll post a picture on the Twitter for that.
It is also full of bright green glowing liquid, to be clear.
Yes.
I knew we were up to something revolutionary, but this is literally dynamite. Watch.
She dips her ungloved hands in the explosive chemical compound and then flicks a glob on the floor like an ecto-cooler Jackson Pollock.
Incredible.
Weird, huh?
I just wanted her to go, it's a snap, too. You just snap her fingers.
Yeah, what are you doing? Oh, no. Charlie isn't impressed by a simple explosive formula, but Alec points out there's more research to be done on this sample. Cable assumes that they've been working toward a weapon this whole time, hence the secrecy, but Alec assures her this is an unexpected development. He puts the sample under his electron microscope and presents to Cable the first ever hybrid plant-animal cell. For whatever reason, the combination of cell types causes rapid replication, meaning that plant growth could be massively accelerated. The formula could aid them in providing a global food supply. Do you guys recall the last time we saw a couple of married scientists developing agricultural technology until a third wheel was flown in to complete a love triangle, operating almost entirely in private?
Did this have something to do with the giant food made in the First Family?
No, not
movie?
that.
Okay.
This one takes place in space.
Oh, with Hector and
Saturn
3. That's
There you go, Saturn 3. Cable worries what the same chemical might do to people, but Linda fucking doesn't because she just dipped her whole damn arm in this stuff.
Oh, at one point during this little presentation, Alex says that he mentions that the world population will be 6.5 billion by
2000, I think.
By the year 2001.
Yeah.
So I looked it up.
Yeah.
The world population in 2001, 6.23 billion.
Wow.
So
Wow.
he was real close.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alec adds a single drop of formula and 200 drops of water with an orchid in a vase to no immediately discernible effect. Cable makes a crack about how boring the work is, and Alec steps away annoyed.
Oops. Forget it. He's just ridiculously sensitive. Our dad was the same.
Your dad?
Cable finally realizes her mistake. The woman she thought was Alec's wife is actually his sister wife, and doubly gross. Not really, she's just his sister. But Alec didn't bother to correct Cable when she assumed that he was married earlier, because sometimes in movies, the good guy doesn't bother to clear up misunderstandings like that and just lets them solve themselves over time. Linda tucks Alec's notebook of scientific findings into a safe in the wall. Moving back through the lab, Alec bends down to observe something. The droplets of the formula that landed on wooden slats on the floor have caused the wood to grow rapidly, and the new branches are already sprouting pine needles.
Wouldn't you imagine that something would happen to her hand?
Right?
By the same time
It
that
should.
these dead logs have grown back?
Yeah. If one drop in the orchid caused it to grow roots around the table in like an hour or less than that.
If this formula is mutating people, yeah.
Yeah, she should have like a giant weird hand already.
Just like a whole other arm growing off of her hand.
Maybe her like essence is just regular human, and so she's fine.
Or maybe her essence is herself dead.
Oh, no.
Oh.
Alec is so shocked by the discovery that once he's brought it to Cable's attention, he pulls her lips to his and they start making out. Linda comes in to see what all the fuss is about, only to find her brother husband cheating on her with Weird Alice the Floozy. Cable runs outside to tell Ritter what they've discovered, and a voice tells her he's in the command shed. When she turns to head that way, the voice appears, and it's Bruno, one of the paramilitary invaders, inexplicably dragging a body out in the open instead of hiding it. Once she gets to the command shed, it seems like there's been a struggle in here, and she notices on one of the monitors inside that Charlie has just been attacked outside the compound. Before she can do anything about it, she's jumped by Ferret, and the two bounce off the walls of the shed until Cable bashes him over the head with a propane tank. Back outside, she knocks down Bruno and takes his gun, spraying it into the swamp and killing another faceless soldier before Bruno and Ferret can wrestle the weapon away from her. They drag her back to the fingerprint scanner, and she tries to warn Alec of the incoming soldiers, but they knock her out with a judo chop.
Alec, watch out!
They use her hand to open the door. The soldiers apprehend Alec, and when Ferret tries to lift the experimental orchid to ask about it, he accidentally lifts the entire table because it has grown a root structure encompassing the entire thing. Ferret explains that he's here on behalf of his boss to collect their research, and Ritter busts in to ask what's going on here.
No, Ritter. Not you.
No, Dr. Holland. Not Ritter. Ritter, poor fellow, is long dead.
Ritter reaches up to peel off his face mask and reveal the face of Louis Jourdan as Arcane. Do you guys recall the last time we saw a character pull off a fully realistic-looking face mask?
I need a hint.
It was a horror film. It was a very last-minute twist that they added to the script because they didn't like the ending in the script. It turned out this person was in disguise every time they killed someone so that they thought this person was the killer.
I don't remember.
Nah.
Happy birthday to me. Remember she's at her birthday party and everyone's dead around the table? And then suddenly another version of the same girl comes out and you're like, what's going on? And then one of them pulls off her face.
Okay.
Was that really the only other time we had a face mask?
That was the most recent one.
I don't know how realistic these would look in real life, to be honest. It's very Scooby-Doo-esque thing.
Considering the Swamp Thing costume, I feel like it wouldn't look like this.
The first thing that came to mind was the twist ending of Nighthawks.
Oh, okay, yeah. Where he's just in a wig.
It's just a wig.
Yeah.
He just
a wig and a robe.
Hey, I'm doing dishes. That means I'm a woman.
That's the most convincing part of the costume at the time. Arcane demands all of Alec's notes, and he immediately opens the safe to hand them over. Arcane sees the glowing fluid inside and asks for that too. Linda can't bear to see their research fall into the wrong hands and tries to knee and elbow her way to freedom, but Arcane cuts her down with his revolver. Alec cries over his dead sister, and Arcane quotes Nietzsche to console him.
What is best for you is not to be born, not to be nothing. But the second best for you is to die soon. Nietzsche.
Alec throws another pair of elbows into Arcane's henchman and grabs the formula to run away with it, but Ferret knocks him to the floor and the sample explodes, fully engulfing Alec in flames. He runs, wrapped in flames, out the door, across the yard, down the dock, and dives into the swamp. The stuntman for this full burn maneuver, Tony Caesar, is famously self-taught by testing different chemicals to fully engulf himself in flames. He was brought back by Wes Craven 2 years later for the famous full burn stunt in Nightmare on Elm Street. And since I didn't list him in my credits later, I'll also mention here that he played Ghostface in the first Scream movie too for Craven.
I feel like the idea of being self-taught when you light yourself on fire, especially before the days of YouTube or any sort of research material that would have existed for this, is terrifying.
You need to have one of those like robots like from Iron Man ready with a fire extinguisher to spray you down.
Right.
One of the special features on one of the various releases of the film, someone mentions that this is at the time, the longest continuous on-screen burn.
Oh,
like
wow.
This.
Yeah, it's like 49 seconds or something.
Yeah,
like
it's pretty long.
Yeah.
And apparently he came through fine. So
yeah, that's impressive.
Holy cow.
It's funny, I was worried about how to pronounce his name, and the way I eventually figured out that it's Caesar, because it's spelled Cecere, and everywhere else was like Cesare, and then I found an interview with the girls who were jumping rope in Nightmare on Elm Street, and they introduced themselves as so-and-so Caesar and so-and-so Caesar, and they say that they were the daughters of the stunt coordinator for the film, and I'm like, Caesar, that's it, but it's spelled the same way. The smoke trailing behind him is as bright green as the formula was. The water explodes in his wake with sparks long after he's disappeared into the swamp. Bruno presents Arcane with Alec's notebooks, suggesting they still have a chance of recreating his success without that exact sample. The team set fire to every structure in the compound, while Cable, inexplicably unattended, sneaks away into the night. Like nobody kept watch on the unconscious girl.
I also don't quite understand Arcane's plan here. It seems like he had an in as Ritter and could have gotten anything and everything he needed without any bloodshed at all.
I think he just knew they were there and thought he was going to walk in, take the stuff, walk out, and set it all on fire behind him. And things just went awry at the last second. We get a sort of drippy slime wipe here to black, and then it raises again in the morning. The bodies of all the assassinated scientists are being dumped in the swamp with ballasts. Weirdly, they don't make mention of one specific missing hostage in the most conspicuous possible Hawaiian shirt. One of the soldiers is literally rifling through the pockets of dead scientists, and he gifts Bruno a stolen locket taken from the corpse of Linda Holland. Bruno leans down and inexplicably hangs the locket on a small tree as if sparsely decorating it for Christmas. What are you doing?
It's foreshadowing.
But I understand when it comes back what it's for, but I don't know why he's doing it now.
I feel like it's implying that he had, some sort of relationship or at least feelings for her.
That Bruno did?
Yeah.
I took
Bruno's never met her.
But
I think he's just sad at the loss of life.
Yeah, I feel like Bruno is a very conflicted henchman.
Okay.
Like
I didn't read that at all.
Oh no, it's like even like towards the beginning, like before the fights are, he's kind of like hesitant to do some things.
Maybe, yeah.
Like when
he's
she,
surprised by the snake when it comes out too.
Yeah, and when she pulls the gun on him, she goes, "Hey, okay, hey, you got me."
Yeah.
Like he doesn't like try to backtalk or anything like that. Yeah. So I thought that they were
he's
playing
making a little sacrifice to them.
Yeah, he's like Bruno, they're dead. It's like show some respect.
But the little tree that he hangs it on, I think it's what grew out of the floorboards.
Right.
Correct.
Right.
Cable sneaks deeper into the burning camp to collect Alec's most recent scientific journal from the stack these men have collected. When she thinks she's caught, she stuffs it into a pile of burnt wood, and while it's hidden, she is kidnapped again by Ferret. That'll happen 12 more times.
Oh, yeah.
But she still never takes off that bright red shirt.
Might as well just throw on like a reflector vest.
Well, she will take it off at one point.
Well, okay, she does change it.
Yeah, that's right.
I get it. Mm-hmm.
He announces that she needs a bath, speaking of, and he drags her to the boat against her will. When she can't take it anymore, she bites Ferret's arm, and he shoves her overboard into the swamp water. The men rowing catch up with her quickly, and Ferret tries to hold her head underwater long enough to suffocate her, but she fights back until her breathing stops, or at least bubbles aren't coming up anymore.
Say hello to your boyfriend, baby.
Suddenly, a Swamp Thing hand reaches out of the water and grabs Ferret by the top of his head. The Swamp Thing surfaces again beneath the boat to flip it over with an explosive punch, and I really love the look of this shot. It's so cool, this practical, and you get this air shockwave of him just blasting the thing. The Swamp Thing collects Cable's body from the water as the nearest soldiers open fire on him, seeming to miss with every bullet. Sometime later, Cable awakens beside the swamp. One of the soldiers, Willie, aims his rifle at her, and Swamp Thing effortlessly tosses the man back into the woods.
So Swamp Thing carries Cable out into the drier part of the swamp,
and just sets her down. And walks
he sets her down, and then to conceal her, takes one branch and lays it on her ankles. I was like,
completely invisible.
Perfect. This bright colored clothing will be perfectly concealed by this piece of wood.
She's like snoring there. Ferret, Bruno, and a thus far unnamed henchman call out to Willie, wondering where he went, before spreading out to locate Cable and whatever else is attacking them. Unnamed henchman number 3, now referred to as Danny, hears a sound in the bushes and opens fire, but another member of their team, Tyrone, falls out of the plants and into the swamp, dead. Danny is barely chastised for killing one of their own.
No! What are you doing? What the hell are you doing, Danny?
Come on! You just murdered one of us. Come on! Giving Swamp Thing the opportunity to discreetly take out Danny.
Where's Danny?
Where's Willie?
Maybe Willie's with Tyrone.
Danny shot Tyrone.
Oh, yeah.
They both turn and see Swamp Thing in the distance passing between trees in an almost perfect replication of that famous shot of Bigfoot.
Yeah.
They decide together that now is a good time to leave, and we hard cut to the palatial estate of Arcane. Nearly all of Alec's scientific journals are spread across Arcane's desk, and he monologues to his secretary, played by Mimi Craven, eventual wife of the director. She was not at the time, but they had met just prior to this film.
But she took his name anyway?
Eventually. She's not Mimi Craven in these credits.
Oh, okay.
She is later.
That would be really weird.
it was like
just like immediately. It's like, do you want to play a secretary? Yes, I'll change my name.
Oh no, no. I was just thinking, like, you know what? Honestly, I think it would have been a really cute way to propose. Like, she's like watching the film, and it's like Mimi Craven, and she looks over, and he's got the ring.
Oh, that's nice. Swamp ring. You make my heart.
So I think they all got a case of swamp ring on this
movie.
movie.
No! Oh, yikes! Arcane seems confident he will soon have the formula replicated. Arcane's secretary is clearly on board with the plan.
And in your hands, sir, how magnificent, how beautiful.
Yes.
The world will bow or starve.
Yes.
Suddenly, it occurs to Arcane that the newest notes in this stack of journals are from 2 weeks ago. He must be missing important test results if they only discovered the new formula yesterday. Still, that gets them within a couple weeks of the answer, which isn't nothing. Another staff member enters the office to inform Arcane that something has happened back in the swamp.
But also, again, he's been on the inside of this whole thing.
Yeah.
I would have just been sneaking into the safe, like copying notes, putting the books back
You
the
haven't
whole
touched
time.
it in 2 weeks. You have access to the room.
Yeah.
The second Arcane assistant is credited as his messenger, and she's being played by Adrienne Barbeau's stunt double, Karen Price. Arcane literally orders his limousine right out into the swamp to speak with Ferret and Bruno, and they tell him about the monster they saw rise from the water. Arcane is also infuriated to learn that they've let Alice Cable escape. We cut right to her, running full speed to a phone booth on the side of a country road. Luckily, she has change on hand for a call, but unluckily, the phone doesn't seem to work. She turns to the neighboring gas station and sees a young boy we'll come to know as Jude sitting on a chair outside.
Uh-huh. Here comes trouble.
Hi.
You in a plane crash?
Which is sort of a meta joke about a 1978 TV movie called Crash, which featured Adrienne Barbeau as a flight attendant in a dramatization of the real-life accident in which Eastern Airlines Flight 401 crash-landed in the Florida Everglades when the pilots inadvertently disabled the autopilot.
I love Jude.
Yeah,
Jude
he's
is great. In the history of children in Swamp Thing media adaptations, he's the pinnacle.
Yeah.
Because it drops off a cliff right after this.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this earlier. He's like the Han Solo of the Swamp Thing movies.
Yeah. He's definitely not trying too hard.
No, he's sort of the voice of cynicism in the film. He's the one who's like, what's going on here? This is crazy. He's the guy who knows what's going on.
But I also like that every line delivery, he's really giving it his sum.
I love it. I think it's perfect.
I thought you were going to say something about in the history of like hick children sitting on porches because honestly,
he doesn't have a banjo though.
He doesn't. He's not like Duddits. You love Duddits.
Or what's the other kid that I like? Pancakes from Cabin Fever. Pancakes. I don't know what you're talking about, kid. Cable asks the boy if they have a functional phone, and Jude points her inside. She makes a call to the agency that sent her here to report the attack.
Get me my next immediate superior, please, and hurry.
Hold on. I'm putting you through to Ritter.
I think he's been neutral.
But she's transferred anyway to her direct supervisor's contact number, which is of course forwarding to a phone in Arcane's limousine. She reports the entire incident to Arcane, posing as Ritter. In the book, the novelization, they explain that this character's name is Caramel Kane, and that she's actually the kidnapped daughter of a U.S. senator.
Oh.
But they don't touch on that at all in the movie. But I guess she just like completely fell in love with this guy.
Or Stockholm Syndrome.
Sure, yeah.
That's a wild detail to add.
Yeah.
Her first name's Caramel?
Caramel Kane, which is like so close to Arcane already. Like she's barely going to have to change her name if this works out. She reports the entire incident to Arcane, posing as Ritter, and she gives him her current location and even mentions that she took the final notebook when she escaped. He promises to pick her up right away. Cable puts another coin from her pocket into the gas station's soda machine, but it doesn't dispense a bottle until Jude hammers on it with his fist for her. I guess in the 80s, people kept a lot of change in their pockets just in case, because I feel like I never have change anymore.
But... And now it's like, where do I put the card?
Right, yeah.
Where does the card go in? Where do I tap this?
I used to have a quarter that I drilled a tiny hole in so I could put it on like a necklace so that I'd always have a necklace. And I was really upset because I was like, they changed it to 35 cents eventually, and I had to add a dime to my necklace, and I'm like, it doesn't look as good now.
That's fun.
And now it's like $3 when you scan your card to get a soda.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Jude informs Cable that her ride is here, and out front she sees Ferret and Bruno. She ducks behind the counter of the shop inside. She tries to make another phone call, but quickly gives up on it.
Is there a gun here? What other place you think this is? Of course there is.
She takes the gun and books it straight out the back door of the place, but the goons spot her immediately. She trips randomly and falls in the grass before diving over a wall of tires to avoid their gunfire. When she tries to shoot back, Jude's gun explodes in her hand, and the men resume their chase, because she mentions when he gives it to her that it's a museum piece. This is an old gun, and she had a feeling it wouldn't work. She crouches in the tall grass to lose them, but then, just as they're driving past her, she stands again. The truck comes frighteningly close to actually hitting actress Adrienne Barbeau.
Yeah.
I can't tell if it's just like forced perspective here, but it looks like it's about to hit her.
And it's knocking down those trees, and she's kind of having to like dodge the trees that are being plowed down.
She eventually loses the truck by passing between trees that are too close together for the truck to follow her, but then immediately ditches the successful strategy by stumbling out onto a dirt road and then running straight down the road where a vehicle could most easily follow her. Her choices at this point are either follow this road or jump into the swamp on either side, and she trips again trying to make a decision. Apparently, when Wes Craven's daughter first saw the movie, she turned to him at this point and said, "Women don't just trip when they're running all the time, Dad." And he took it to heart. He was like, he felt really terrible about it, and everything moving forward, he was like, not going to make this mistake. Like, there has to be a reason a person falls down.
Yeah.
It's not just, oh, they fell down because they're scared.
If Bryce Dallas Howard can outrun a T-Rex in heels,
right,
then...
The bad guys speed down the road to run her over when Swamp Thing steps into the road to block their path. Ferret urges Bruno to drive straight through the monstering girl, but Swamp Thing stretches his arms wide and catches the grill of the truck, stopping it instantly. He moves around the side to tear the roof off before yanking Bruno out and tossing him into the swamp.
And the roof just gently floats away.
Yeah. It's too scared of Swamp Thing.
And it's like, this is like the second time that Bruno just gets thrown into the water.
It's going to keep happening too.
It's just like, he really wants Bruno just to be sopping
He hates
wet.
Bruno specifically.
And this is a nice kind of reflection of a scene in the comic, because in the first issue, Swamp Thing does slam his hands on the hood of an oncoming car, and everybody kind of plunges through the windshield. So
that would have been cool.
Yeah, so that I kind of like that. It sort of reflected that from the source material.
That's awesome. Swamp Thing takes a dozen shots to the chest from the other henchman, but barely reacts. A soldier bravely takes Cable hostage in the midst of all this until Swamp Thing tears the man away from her. Cable wades out into the swamp to escape the creature she doesn't realize yet is protecting her.
Shoo!
And then he's like, "Oh," like he's just on the shore, like, "Oh, I was trying to help."
That's a cute scene.
Yeah. Jude, the boy from the gas station, shows up to rescue her.
What happened to that thing?
It, hit a tree.
Uh-huh. Must be one of those hit and run kind of trees.
See, Jude knows what's up.
The perfect line.
Yes.
Jude points out the bizarrely shaped Swamp Thing footprints in the grass and then leads her back to the station for dry clothes. Or I thought he was going back to the station, but then they kind
like
of...
a hunting lodge or something, he said.
Back at the mansion, Bruno and Ferret report the details of the monster to Arcane.
Some of the men say it's one of those abdominal snowmen or something.
Yeah, Bruno says that, I think. Yeah.
I tell you, it was like hitting a tree. And bullets hurt it, but they don't seem to stop it.
Arcane thinks this Swamp Thing is proof of the immortality achievable by way of this magical new formula. He wants the monster captured and the 7th journal recovered. He points out that Swamp Thing is staying close to Cable so they can clearly use her as bait. And we hard cut to Swamp Thing screaming to the heavens in the middle of the swamp. She's like, "This hurts more than you realize, just being me."
He's like BioCop.
Yeah.
It's like, oh.
Then we cut to Jude captaining a rowboat through the swamp like a gondola operator.
Yeah, there's like flowers on the boat too.
Yeah.
So it's like, are they
Very
on a
fancy.
date?
Yeah,
Well,
but it's
what's
not
funny
just
too is
flowers. It looks like there's like a baby doll strapped to the front of it.
That's cute. That's a lovely thing.
No, it's creepy.
But I also like that you can tell that the boat's just being towed because when he puts the stick in the water, he's not like reaching all the way to the bottom. He's just kind of dipping it in the water and pulling it back. Looking around them, Cable reflects on Alec's words about the beauty of the swamp, and Jude continues rowing her to where she hid the last journal. Swamp Thing arrives first to the smoldering remains of the laboratory. He finds the locket in the tree, and inside are photos of himself and his sister wife Linda. How could anyone confuse them for lovers? That's so crazy.
I wanted to point this out. This extreme close-up of Swamp Thing's hands look just so much like gloves.
Yeah.
They don't look like natural in the slightest.
Perfect.
You see the bends in the knuckles or in the joints. And
you see the brand name on the side.
But that said, there are a lot of really pretty shots in this scene of him like reaching for the overgrown plant.
Right,
And even though the costume is an object of mockery over the years, it does sometimes look okay.
Here,
there's some tenderness to it, and it does look okay.
Yeah.
Because it's shot right, it's angled right. It does look
That's
fine.
what's important is you need to either get him 80 feet away from you or just at the right angle that you don't see like legs folding and things like that.
Kind of reminds me of the Gort costume.
Sure, yeah.
Where they had two versions of the costume. One where he could face the front because they had all the costume like tied all the seams in the back, and then they had the other side of the costume where it's his back of the costume with all the seams in the front.
So whenever they did a spinning shot, he had to constantly change.
Well, yeah.
Or just face the camera
yeah,
all the time.
No, yeah. He's like, he just always faces the camera.
That's funny.
Or always faces away from the camera.
Interesting.
And those times where you see like the times where he does have an angle and you can just see it's not even like, it's just sewn together.
Yeah, you just see a dude's ass hanging out of the back.
Sometimes we see what we want to see.
That's right. That's right, we do. Swamp Thing tears up at the sight of his sister, probably. We don't even know who this Swamp Thing is, really. We get a quick flashback insert of her wearing it, which I think is the same shot of her walking in on the Alex-Alice makeout session, which maybe that's why they decided to call her Cable, because you can't call them Alec and Alice. Mm-hmm. Why would you do that? Speak of the devil, Cable finds him here crying in the lab and watches as he lifts beakers and test tubes to try and resume his science work in the rubble.
Now, I don't know what he was expecting to accomplish.
Yeah. He's like, as soon as he tips something, everything just shatters and explodes in his hands.
Well, yeah, like, I think what they're trying to have him do is like, oh, I can't do this because I'm too strong and I'm crushing all these beakers. But like, no, all those things were in a fire and they're really damaged.
Super brittle now.
Yeah, it's like, I don't think that this is your fault.
Swamp Thing cries out to the sky again, and Cable runs away in terror, snagging the last journal on her way back to the boat. She tells Jude they have to get this information to Washington. The one beautiful thing in the middle of this burned-down lab is the orchid plant from his single drop experiment, which has bloomed into a full orchid tree now. We cut to Ferret, Bruno, and a new unnamed third henchman as they pilot a gunboat back toward the lab. Bruno repeats Charlie's warning from earlier.
Local people say this place is full of ghosts.
Well, there's gonna be one more before this day is through.
They spot Cable and Jude and start to give chase when, as Arcane predicted, the Swamp Thing appears to draw their attention. Ferret calls for backup from 2 more airboats with mounted guns to approach their location. Swamp Thing tears Bruno off the side of the gunboat because he loves picking on Bruno specifically. Then he lures one of the airboats off a ramp, tossing its passengers into the water. The surviving craft hits Swamp Thing with a barrage of grenades, and eventually they lose sight of the creature.
At one point, they see Swamp Thing go into the tall grass, and they're all, "We got him cornered."
Yeah,
it's like I don't like he literally has. I think he can go pretty much any direction.
There are no corners on this map. By now, Cable and Jude are long gone.
Do you see him?
Yeah, I see him everywhere.
I actually really like that line. Suddenly, Swamp Thing jumps down into the boat to attack them, throwing them one at a time into the water, again, instead of killing them.
Where does he jump from exactly?
Platform
where
right next to the boat.
He's swinging in on a spider web.
Yeah.
Because they're looking
he must
all
have
around.
Leapt out of the grass.
And then he just leaps. He's not the most agile kind of creature. I don't know where he's coming from at this point.
The unnamed third henchman here gets the Wilhelm scream on his way overboard. Swamp Thing intentionally crashes the last 2 enemy crafts into each other for another massive gasoline fire explosion, and then we explosion wipe to Bruno explaining their latest failure to shirtless Kane on his own boat, who evidently came out here in person to collect them.
This is like one of my favorite speeches by Arcane here is like, he's like a brilliant chess master.
Yeah.
Planning each of his moves. It's like,
He's just grabbing people and throwing them.
I think you're making too much out of Swamp Thing at this point.
That's funny. It's like when people say like, oh, he's playing 4D chess. And it's like, no, this isn't that. This is dodgeball.
We do see a chessboard in Arcane's mansion earlier. So maybe he just thinks of everything in terms of chess.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, Arcane is always very understanding of his henchmen's excuses.
Strong adversaries like a beautiful, dangerous woman. I've never been able to resist either. Tell the captain to weigh anchor.
We're going home.
No, we're not.
When they reach the edge of the swamp, Cable leaves Jude, the 10-year-old gas station owner, in charge of the valuable government secrets while she leaves to quote-unquote get help. Cable is maybe 15 steps away when Jude screams out for her.
Cable! Shh! Jude, go and do what I told you. It's not safe here anymore. You hear? Jude!
Jude's boat floats into frame, and the kid has already been murdered somehow, presumably mugged of the final notebook. Ferret lunges into frame to capture her, and, drawn by her scream, Swamp Thing finds Jude's corpse in the boat. He wraps his arm around Jude's bloody head to magic him back to life. Jude reaches for his glasses to see what just resurrected him.
Oh, shit. There goes the neighborhood.
Bless you, Jude.
Now, is this a power that was exhibited by this time?
No. I mean, we're on what, day 2, I think, of the movie. No, Swamp Thing, later in the series, as he gains more control over plant life, he's able to affect, the flora or whatever that exists in human beings.
But he doesn't generally have like E.T. glowing hands fix power?
No, he can. Much later, he's able to like repair some damage to people. Like,
because I know on the 1990 series that he does this occasionally. He just like, oh, your mom got shot to death. Here, I'll just give her a big hug, and she'll just pop out. She'll be fine.
Well, it would be neat to explain like it's like, oh, he can do like herbal remedies with a touch. But not like instant healing. It's like, let me just put some aloe vera on that.
Hey, Alec, why don't you go stay at the hospital forever? What are you doing out here? Like, there's people that are dying every day. You could resurrect them instantly. What are you doing out here?
And how would he know how to do this? Why would he assume, I've been turned into a plant. I guess I can heal now.
It's just his nature.
I guess so.
Jude recognizes Swamp Thing as the guy who distracted the baddies earlier and assumes this monster is someone he can trust. He slips him the last journal out from under his shirt and hands it over to a vine monster. What are you doing, kid? Insane that the henchmen didn't even bother to check Jude for the journal. It's like they just wanted to murder a child that badly. The goons take Cable to Arcane's boat, but apparently he's sleeping below deck or something, and they just have to wait for him to wake up.
He's busy.
He's like, oh, he's taking a real nap, so let's just try and use our indoor voices. But we're outside. Shh. In the meantime, Ferret decides to force a kiss on Cable, and she doesn't necessarily resist, but as soon as he pulls back, she knees him in the crotch and throws him overboard, before diving in herself to swim the opposite direction to freedom.
I was like, oh my God, this is so great. Because the whole time that she was being dragged onto the boat, it's like, why are you not resisting? Yeah. Just kick. Do something. And like when she did, I was like, oh, thank you.
And Locklear does a lot of the same thing in the second movie. A lot of kicks to the balls.
Well, Cable actually comports herself fairly well in a lot of the fight scenes in this. She's always kicking butt.
Yeah, for like the novelization says she's like an MIT grad and she's here for technical work and she's like grabbing machine guns from people and firing them capably into the swamp. On the shore, Cable crashes headlong into Swamp Thing trying to outrun Ferret, and this time the creature manages to choke out her name.
Cable!
When Swampy tries to block Ferret's path, Ferret uses that machete we saw earlier to hack off Swamp Thing's left arm. So he uses his right arm to grab Ferret by the top of the head again and just squeeze his skull to death.
Yeah, nice look in Ferret's face, too, as this is happening,
When we see Ferret crumpled on the ground, he's bleeding from the mouth and neck. So that's a pretty brutal head shove. Bruno screams to his partner from Arcane's boat and gets no response. Arcane tells Bruno they'll leave without Ferret. We cut back to unconscious Cable sleeping on Swamp Thing and waking with a startle. He offers her an orchid from the plant he mutated.
Nice orchid.
Family Orchidaceae. Genus Orchis. Over 100 species here. Much beauty in the swamp. If you only look.
Only now does it occur to Cable, who might have been following her for the last 24 hours.
Alec?
She asks if his arm hurts.
Only when I laugh.
And they both laugh. Do you guys recall the last time we heard this punchline?
Was it Only When I Laugh?
That's right. Neil Simon's Only When I Laugh.
What does Only When I Laugh mean?
Old joke. A man has a spear sticking through his chest and his friend asks, does it hurt? And he says, Only when I laugh.
Now, it's funny that it took Cable this long to realize that this swamp creature was Alec Holland.
Right.
You figure she would have figured it out the second she saw him in the old lab trying to mix,
Yeah, you would think
together.
that would have
been a big clue. Yeah.
We cut now to Cable bathing nude in the water while Swampy just watches.
Yeah, peeping Swamp Thing.
Yeah. In the European cut of this film, she stands in the water fully tits out for like a minute longer, and apparently when MGM put out a DVD in 2000, they accidentally put the European cut on their DVD release.
Accidentally.
Yes. But even then, it took 2 years before a mother rented it from a Blockbuster and then walked in on her son watching this scene in a supposedly PG-rated film. Adrienne Barbeau's contract stipulated that the extended nudity sequences would not be included in the domestic release, so the studio reached out to see if she would let it slide, and she wouldn't. So they had to recall the entire run of DVDs 2 years after they were released.
Good for her.
How do you do that? Nobody's going to send their discs back in and be like, please give me one with less boobs.
There's a recall. There's something very dangerous on there. Don't look at it.
I might still have one.
I'm sure. I'm sure a lot of people were like, it has what?
And it's
You're
also,
not getting this back.
And it's also non-anamorphic. So
right, yes.
So it's
even more of the screen.
Yeah, it's less of the screen. It's just a little box in the middle of black bars.
Oh, okay.
At the time when the recall happened,
yeah,
those first edition DVDs were popping up all over eBay.
Yeah.
And people would always say it's the band nude scene. This is the one where Adrienne Barbeau was topless, and it's like
for the whole movie.
Well, no, she's topless in both versions. It's just it's more topless in the other film.
I just want to know how many seconds of boobs are allowed for PG.
I mean, there's just a flash of side boob. That's all that's in the domestic cut.
Yeah. I would say it's also kind of being done tastefully.
Sure.
In the European version, she's basically aimed at the audience.
Yeah. She's standing like a whole foot out of the water, just like.
Yeah. Well, here you go.
Yeah.
Here's what you get in your comic book movie, friends.
Right. When she finishes up, Arcane is waiting for her in the shadows and gestures to his henchmen to capture the girl for the 11th time today.
Okay, here's the thing. Swamp Thing was right there.
Right.
And he just wanders off.
He keeps doing that.
Why would you keep wandering off when every time you wander off, Arcane's goons show up?
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
I thought you meant there was still more boobs to see.
Oh,
that too, yeah.
Probably that, yeah.
It's funny, though, in the movie, Arcane and his henchmen at least wait for her to redress after the bath, but in the novelization, they don't. They just throw a net over her naked right when she gets out of the water. Swampy hears her screams and comes racing up beside her when Arcane gestures to his men in the trees to drop down a net. Swampy senses what's up and shoves Cable away to take the full net by himself. Cable leans down to check on him, and Arcane is shocked to hear her refer to this monster by a name.
Alec.
Holland.
You knew, didn't you? You knew we'd be caught.
The only way out is through.
We get another slime wipe to black and come back up at a fancy dinner party at Arcane's mansion. Again, the European cut differs from the domestic, with a pair of Romany dancers entertaining guests and eventually removing their tops before we cut to the actual dinner party scene. But it's like just a full minute of two women stripping and in the middle of a room, and like dudes are like fondling their boobs and everything.
Yeah, it's
no character that you recognize in this shot at all.
Entirely gratuitous.
Yeah. Apparently, the European distributors were looking for a reason to rate it R, because they thought that people would be more likely to go see this horror monster movie if it had an R rating, and so this is what they decided to do with these removable sections that spliced easily into the domestic
were these
cut.
filmed by Wes Craven?
Yeah,
Okay.
They were filmed during the production. They were just left on the side so that they would be only included in this other film.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure if like these things were
No, it
added.
wasn't like they came in and shot stuff like Roger Corman doing like extra rape scenes just for no reason. Evidently, all the guests at Arcane's party are cool with the Lady of Honor being tied to her chair. She's also wearing a completely different dress, so they must have stripped her and redressed her unless she changed willingly. Though I suspect if his guests aren't party to her kidnapping, they all just assume this is some sort of role play fetish they're acting out in front of everyone. Especially when he describes everything they've accomplished in fantasy terms.
The occasion for this celebration is, of course, known to you all. We have captured the dragon and rescued the damsel in distress.
I don't like that he switches metaphors from chess, because he's talking about like capturing the queen. And, it's like now you're switching it to like a fantasy setting.
Yep. What's he doing? He eulogizes Ferret before the announcement of his successful replication of the Holland formula. Bruno is applauded for recovering the final notebook and making the new formula possible. He raises a toast to the man, but doesn't mention until too late that Bruno's goblet has actually been spiked with the transformative formula, which I feel like you would probably notice, because isn't it fucking glowing if it works?
Well, but so everyone has like a normal like champagne flute.
Oh, but his is the one that...
His is like a silver goblet.
It's a silver goblet with a top over it and just like a sippy cup hole. Bruno starts drooling, melting, and squealing at the end of the table, and eventually he transforms into a small goblin creature. He jumps up on the table, and the guests scatter. Later, Arcane descends the steps into his basement dungeon to speak with Swamp Thing. Bruno is led into the same cell, and Arcane demands Holland explain the difference in their reactions to the formula, since they are virtually identical samples.
Why doesn't Bruno there have your strength?
Because he never had it.
No riddles, please.
Arcane chains up Cable and threatens her life if he doesn't get a clear answer here, so Swamp Thing elaborates.
It only amplifies your essence. It simply makes you more of what you already are.
Bruno's essence was stupidity, timidity.
Arcane assumes that his essence must certainly be genius, and thus taking the formula himself would only multiply his intelligence the way it has multiplied Holland's strength. Back in his own lab, Arcane fills a goblet with the formula and steps out onto the veranda to take a hearty sip.
Now, about the essence business.
Yes.
Well, when Alec Holland first turns into Swamp Thing,
yeah,
I'm assuming everybody just thought that, it was the formula was splashed on him. It accelerated the plant growth. It grew all through his body. It turned into a plant monster. There's no essence really involved here.
Right.
But so it feels like they changed the functioning of the formula.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah.
Now it just changes into a monster.
Right.
Some kind of monster.
Every time you drink it,
on
you just turn into a monster.
Yes. They do explain it a little more in the book.
Sure.
In the novelization.
Yeah.
Where it's just, I think it's implied that as Alec Holland was just really into, plants
he cared
and
so
swamp
much
life
about
and
trees.
stuff.
He had this connection to nature that was very extreme.
Yeah. But I don't know.
Yeah. You could tell that it's an aspen because of the way that it is. I love that clip. That guy doing random nature videos, but he knows nothing about nature. Another thing the novelization mentions here is that when we see Arcane's lab, in the novelization, it's almost an exact duplicate of Holland's lab. And even like Holland built his own electron microscope from scratch. And so this guy has an exact duplicate of the Holland electron microscope. Like he literally had his people manufacture a duplicate of every part.
I hope he had his own Cooper's digger.
Yeah, I hope so.
Well, he does now.
a toasted one because it burned down in that lab. What?
Oh, I meant his henchman kind of looks like
that's
one.
true. Yeah, he kind of does. Back in the dungeon, Swamp Thing sees a beam of light cutting through the room, and Cable urges him to reach for it to recharge his own strength.
Which has never been established or mentioned.
Yeah. Arcane's second assistant delivers to him a glass of brandy, but then leaves the room horrified as he starts to transform. His fingers bulge at their tips and blacken. This is a pretty cool looking thing because it looks like he's actually got his hands inside of it, but it's like bulging at the ends of his fingers. So cool glove piece. The Swamp Thing reaches his fingers into the light, and we cut back to Arcane. The top half of his head is now fully scabbed over, and he shakes as blood drips down his face. With the power of the sunlight, Swamp Thing begins sprouting back his severed arm. Back upstairs, Arcane looks like a huge burnt tongue until he freezes in place and clawed paws break loose from his cocoon skin like when Dana Barrett and Louis Tully are busted out of the barbecued hellhounds at the end of Ghostbusters.
I was hoping he was going to kind of stay
a tongue,
like a blob, because I thought that people were their essence, and I'm like, oh, because he's like a slime ball guy,
or
like
he won't
turns
shut up.
into like this lump of slime.
Yeah.
Well, it seemed to imply that he would become something more insect-like since he's going through some kind of chrysalis.
Yeah, that would make sense.
I am a little confused by what he turns into. I don't know how it represents
I'm confused
his
by what
essence.
literally everybody turns into in this movie.
He becomes a Power Rangers monster of the week.
Yeah.
I do like the contrast between Swamp Thing's healing and Arcane's sort of degradation.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, the effects involved are questionable.
Yeah.
But I do like the contrast.
Yeah. Swamp Thing's initial baby arm is comically lame, but it's quickly replaced with a full-size one. And upstairs, the Arcane beast rips off a hood of cocoon fabric to reveal a sort of fruit bat head with giant boar tusks.
What he looks like to me a little bit.
Yeah.
Just a little bit.
The Cooper's digger.
Yeah. He looks like the Imperious leader from the original Battlestar Galactica.
Okay.
With the frizzy hair and the extended face.
And the fur is going like the whole way down past his shoulders.
Yeah, it does go a lot farther down, but yeah, it's what it kind of reminded me of.
In the dungeon, Swamp Thing stands and rips off his chains and cables before trying to tear down the door to their cell. Upstairs, Arcane spikes the remaining formula like a football, causing a massive explosion, and then arms himself with a broadsword to face off against the monster in his dungeon. This movie got real weird real quick.
Or real great.
Why does he have a sword?
I don't know. Why is that the go-to thing?
Why do you not?
That's what you do for plants. But get a machete. Yeah. The machete thing made sense.
Or a pair of shears.
Yeah. Pruning shears and just go take him down. Just get his ankles.
Oh, no.
The Bruno goblin shows Swampy a trick to unlock the cell from inside.
Put there in case a guard ever got shut in by mistake.
It's like, flip that switch. It's like, that's way too easy.
Yeah.
You shouldn't just have a switch on the wall inside of a cell. It's like, what are the chances that they're going to flip that switch? They're only going to be in here for years.
Apparently they know their guards are idiots.
Yeah.
But I like the character turn for Bruno.
That he's on their side now?
Yeah.
Well, he's been imprisoned. It's not fair.
And it was established earlier that he wasn't feeling too good about what he was doing this whole time. So, yeah, the turn makes a little bit of sense.
If his transformation had been a little bit taller, they probably wouldn't have even put him in this cell. Because they were like, oh, you can't reach it. It's fine. Swampy opens the cell and Bruno leads them out. They quickly come face to face with Arcane, the demon pigman. Bruno offers to slow Arcade down to give Swampy and Cable time to leap into a fountain that flushes them back out into the swamp.
Yeah, so...
It's like a magical spring.
Yeah, Bruno says that this is a well from a spring that's fed from the swamp. It's like, no, it's just a water pipe that goes to the swamp. It's not...
can't constantly go back and forth. That doesn't make sense.
Craven says in his commentary that at this point he had a whole underground sequence planned of Swamp Thing and Cable running away.
Right, there were 2 fights and stuff underwater. Yeah.
Right, but money was not going to allow it.
Right.
Yeah.
On the outside, Swamp Thing carries Cable to dry land and sets her down when Arcane rises from the swamp behind him. Swampy knocks him down and Arcane swings his sword blindly into the water for a while. When Swamp Thing suddenly dives behind Cable, inadvisably, Arcane lunges forward and stabs her through the tit with the sword. Swamp Thing goes berserk and beats Arcane unconscious with a club made of a tree root, and then he cuddles Cable closely, but we obviously aren't worried because we saw him resurrect a child earlier today with no trouble. Swampy puts a hand on Cable's breast, and it glows green, the hand does. While he resurrects her, Arcane wakes up and approaches with the sword again. Cable points Swampy to the approaching enemy, and he finishes off Arcane with his own sword before returning to her.
This final battle isn't very Swamp Thing-ish for the comic, but it's still kind of great.
Yeah.
Even the costumes don't look great, especially Swamp Thing's costume kind of looks like wet Levi's at one point.
Yeah.
But still, just seeing the two of them just beating on each other with a sword and a club.
Yeah, I wish he'd kept the club for the whole fight, though, because when it's just one guy with a sword and the other guy just punching, like, it's not as compelling a fight.
Right.
But I do like that club he whips up. Cable points Swampy to the approaching enemy, and he finishes off Arcane with his own sword before returning to her. She seems fully resurrected when he gets back to her.
I don't understand. It's healed.
And we're even treated to a few inserts of Arcane's wound overflowing with chocolate foam. Like, there's something weird happening to this guy. Swampy tells Cable that the battle is over, but she wants to come with him.
You can start your work again.
He holds up his leafy hands.
With these,
I'll be your hand. Please.
you need to heal. You need to tell our story. I'll see you soon. Until then, I'll always be with you.
She watches him go, and Jude runs up to find her standing there so he can lead her back to civilization.
Where did Jude come from? Aren't they at Arcane's mansion?
Yeah, exactly. He jumped into the thing. So now he's out here. It's perfect. It all makes sense. They watch Swamp Thing disappear into the distance until credits roll. The end.
And I guess Bruno got away.
Yeah, with their Bruno, you know?
Yeah.
That's true. I guess, yeah, we don't see his fate.
Yeah.
You would expect him to get killed in that fight with Arcane, saving them time.
Well, yeah, but he buys them time, and he manages. You see him run away.
Right. Yeah.
So Arcane obviously doesn't take the time to pursue him. He goes after
maybe
Swamp
his
Thing.
essence was agility.
Now, the thing I always kind of wondered about Swamp Thing is why didn't he just go to an emergency room and say, hey, I've been turned into a plant monster. Someone help me.
Or let me help other people.
Yeah, or that too. Now, in the comic, the justification is that his body's infused with the biorestorative formula.
Right.
And he doesn't want it falling into the wrong hands.
Okay, that makes sense.
In the movie, I mean, I suppose it would be the same reason. I don't know. But you'd think that maybe he'd go find some medical help somewhere.
Yeah.
Instead of just hanging out in the swamp forever.
I just realized I failed to make the note, but after he reunites with her and he takes the journal back, he just hurls it into the woods because he doesn't want people to find it. It's like, that's not the best way to get rid of information. It's to just throw it in the woods because someone's going to just find that and pick it up.
Well, at one point,
Well, and Bruno does. Yeah.
Right.
But at one point, Cable hides it when the original lab is like burning down. Like she just hides it under like a smoldering log. I'm like,
you're just worried it's going to catch fire
they're
there.
not great at hiding things.
I mean, really, you want to destroy it. You're not trying to like preserve this knowledge at
But
this
I think
point.
she was trying to
Maybe
preserve
she
it.
was. Maybe she was. In the 1989 sequel entitled The Return of Swamp Thing, somehow Arcane returned.
Now, there is something in the comics about Arcane getting killed at the end of his adventure and then coming back in the following comic where he's been transformed into some hideous creature. And this happens like a couple times over the years.
So maybe what happens is it takes all this energy to transform, and that's just like an extra life on top of your regular life. And then when they kill that monster, then you turn back into a human. That's what's going on. And again, he's played by Louis Jourdan.
Oh, wow. He came back?
Yeah.
Yeah, he came. Yeah. Well, the check probably cleared.
Yeah. His stepdaughter, niece in the comics, Abigail Arcane, comes to town with questions about her mother's mysterious death, and Arcane plans to use her, as he did her mother, in his experiments. He now has a whole zoo of unmen, and Swamp Thing helps save Abigail from Arcane's plans and end his unethical experiments once and for all. In place of the Jude character, we get these two kid sidekicks that are just wandering around the story like a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern situation.
They're terrible.
It's pretty rough. It's rough child acting compared to Jude. The following year, USA began airing half-hour episodes of a Swamp Thing TV series, still starring Dick Durock as the titular character. A new actor, Mark Lindsay Chapman, takes over the Dr. Anton Arcane role. And no, he didn't shoot John Lennon, but he did play John Lennon in that 2007 film, Chapter 27.
Oh.
So Jared Leto is Mark David Chapman, and Mark Lindsay Chapman is playing Lennon. The show ran for 3 seasons and 72 episodes, and I watched about the first third of it this week, the first season, the 22 episodes. The 2 kids from the second film are now one kid who Swamp Thing just sort of watches over as a protector, but apparently, beyond what I watched, this kid is at some point kidnapped and just never returns to the show. Like, he's kidnapped at the end of a season, like it's going to be a big cliffhanger thing, and then they just like, apparently someone like offhand mentions like, oh, he's okay, he moved away with his mom. And it's like, they don't bring the kid back ever because it was just too much of a hassle to work around child actor hours, probably.
The supporting characters get exchanged pretty quickly in the show.
He just like Richie Cunningham's brother, just ran upstairs one day and just never came back down.
The next adaptation was a 5-episode animated series. It has a very G.I. Joe aesthetic, and it's basically just Swamp Thing clashing with Arcane, Dr. Demo, Skin Man, and Weed Killer, with other like random unmen occasionally.
It was basically an excuse to sell toys.
Yeah.
And which, of course, I have several of.
Sure.
There's a Swamp Thing board game, Battle for the Bayou, which is kind of great. And,
that's fun.
And it's the cartoon is very hard to watch, but the related merchandise is a lot of fun.
Sure.
They put out Swamp Thing slippers. They're children's size, unfortunately. It won't fit on my big old feet, but they're
have
these fuzzy,
surgically shrunken so you can wear the Swamp Thing slippers.
They're the fuzzy green slippers with these plastic Swamp Thing heads on the ends.
That's awesome.
They're incredibly tacky. It's great.
I feel like the late 80s, early 90s was like a haven for like, oh, this product's not for kids. How can we make it for kids?
Yeah.
Like
Against its will.
RoboCop and Toxic Crusader.
Police
like
Academy.
Yeah, it's like, we're going to make kids' toys for these movies that these kids should absolutely not be watching.
Oh, I had an Alien board game in '79.
Yeah.
They made toys for these R-rated movies for kids all the time.
And we also, in the transition to the animated series, we take the one kid from the live action series and we go back to being the 2 kids from the second movie, basically. Like, I think they rename them, but they have the same chemistry where the 2 kids are just joking with each other and wandering around in every scene.
And causing trouble, giving reasons for Swamp Thing to come rescue
them. He has to keep protecting them, yeah. And then the next series is the 2019 series, which HBO Max had greenlit, but then canceled before it even aired its first episode. It shot the whole 10-episode season, and then they were like, guess what? No one's ever going to see this. We're not even going to air the first one. And then I think eventually it did drop on their DC thing because people got pretty upset about it. And then they also aired it on CW for like...
Yeah, it was
network stuff.
Yeah, because they ran it. They ran the 10 episodes on the DC Universe streaming service.
Right.
And then I think during the pandemic or the beginning years of the pandemic, they needed programming for their network shows, so they brought Swamp Thing over and ran that onto CW.
So in that version, Alec and Abigail are played at first like a sort of Mulder and Scully, investigating a sickness that's affecting a lot of people around this swamp town. Derek Mears takes over the role of Swamp Thing, and the suit and the CGI for the show are all actually pretty incredible. I really like the look of it. From what I understand, he was closer to the Alan Moore comics with the specific twist, obviously.
Yeah, they rushed through a lot of Swamp Thing history in a very short period of time.
The show also features Kevin Durand as the Floronic Man, who develops the story's central formula. Will Patton is a local business owner. Avery Sunderland, who is illegally polluting the local swamp. Abby and Alec are warned off the case, but when they won't give up, Alec is killed and then sort of resurrected into Swamp Thing. The biggest difference here, spoiler alert, if you're working your way through Swamp Thing, you don't want a huge spoiler because this is as big as they come for this franchise. We learn in this incarnation of the show that Alec Holland does not become the Swamp Thing. The Swamp Thing absorbs Alec's consciousness and memories, and it thinks that it's Alec. But a few episodes after Abby has decided that Alec became the Swamp Thing, the police find Alec's body, and he is indeed fully dead, which I thought was a really neat twist. There's also a side story about a failed actor, Daniel Cassidy, played by Ian Ziering, who's best known in the universe as an actor for a film within the show about a blue devil, and by the end of the show, he sort of mystically becomes his character from these movies, so he grows these blue horns, and it's clear he was going to be like a major player in the second season of the show, and then it just didn't end up happening.
Really?
Yeah. It's a weird choice, I thought, but I definitely would have enjoyed another season of this.
And Blue Devil is a character from DC Comics, and I like Blue Devil quite a bit.
And then what was the other thing you were going to say about?
Oh.
Is it about the Alan Moore comics?
It was the big impetus for the character in the comics was the hope that he could somehow change himself back to human.
Right, yeah.
So losing that possibility, finding out that he was never human in the first place, was a devastating blow to the character and quite the game changer for the series. And I guess Alan Moore had brought this idea to the creator of or co-creator of the character, Len Wein, who was editing Swamp Thing comics at the time.
Right.
And Len Wein said, "Oh yeah, go for it. Let's see what happens."
Yeah.
So it fully had Len Wein's blessing.
But it was really interesting because now suddenly this character who thought she had lost this guy that she really cared about, and then thought that she had gotten him back and that there might be some way to him being human again, realizes, no, I lost him again. Like the person I actually fell in love with is dead, even if his memories are in this other being. But also, he's not the only person whose memories and sort of soul, if you will, are in this Swamp Thing creature, because there's also this other girl that was sick that's at the hospital, and someone else's sick mother. Like all these characters that had the same sickness at the beginning of the story, elements of their personality are alive within this character, and so sometimes they can see through Swamp Thing's eyes as he's being attacked by people or spying on people, and they just assume that they're dreams that they're having. But Holland is the only one who's dead, so he only exists as the Swamp Thing.
Now, interestingly, in the comics, currently, Alec Holland is the Swamp Thing again.
Oh, okay.
They actually resurrected Alec Holland during some big, DC Universe event.
Sure.
And as a matter of course, he was changed back into Swamp Thing for various reasons.
Okay.
So yeah, it's once again back to the old, I'm a human in a Swamp Thing. I'm going to
cure myself somehow.
Yeah. And now there's a new guy also who's Swamp Thing. Right. It gets complicated.
And I also watched a couple of other sort of cameo appearances. There's a Harley Quinn episode where Poison Ivy has this potted plant friend named Frank. He's like a pet, and he's being held and tortured somewhere, but she can't figure out where. She can usually tap into the green to find him, but she's so distraught that she's not able to find him, so they have to go to find Swamp Thing, who is like an ex of hers, to ask him to help them find Frank. And it's funny because Swamp Thing's kind of like a dude bro, and he has his vines are tied in like a man bun top knot. It's pretty funny. But it's about them trying not to hurt his feelings and to flirt with him just enough to get this favor out of him and then disappear, and he gets all pissed off, and it's a good episode. He also shows up, Swamp Thing shows up in Teen Titans Go to the Movies. He's in a few episodes of the show too, but he's sort of in the background, and when they're joking about other characters who have gotten movies made from their characters, he's featured in a lot of those scenes. But most recently, and it seems like this is the reason that they actually, half of it was financial. They dumped that HBO Max show because they were like, it's a tax write-off. We get more money if we never air it, or if we don't greenlight it. But also, a lot of people think that it might have been to make way for James Gunn's announcement that they're going to be doing another Swamp Thing feature as a part of the DC universe. So there is apparently an upcoming version. It's coming from writer-director James Mangold, who had a lot of success, obviously, with another Len Wein adaptation in the form of the Wolverine swan song Logan, and more recently, obviously, less celebrated Indiana Jones swan song Dial of Destiny. But yeah, so I'm excited for it. I think James Mangold is a good choice for that story, and I would love to see what he does with it, as long as it's like dark and sad and fits like the original. I actually would love a straight adaptation of the original story before even the first like Swamp Thing series came out.
Right. I'm just hoping that they get to it, because the way superhero movies and just big budget action movies like this have been going, it seems like they're not bringing in the box office like they used to. Especially.
And like how Blade has been kicked down the road for a decade now. They keep saying, oh, it's coming right around the corner. Oh, we have a new script. We have a new script. We have a new script. And now all the cast are dropping out of it. Like, that's basically just back down to Mahershala Ali. That's it. That's all they have connected right now.
I'm certainly looking forward to it. I would love to see it. I don't know if it'll happen, but I would love to see it.
But yeah, that's all I have on the Swamp Thing franchise. I really liked this movie. It's not beloved, it seems, by a lot of people. It seems like, from what I've read, comic book fans are not a huge fan of the changes that they made to the canon story. But I actually like it just as a movie on its own. I think the effects are pretty cool. I think the direction is good. The writing's not terrible. From what I understand, the writing was much better when they started production, and then the studio kept pulling money out of the project and revising the budget down from where they started. And so Wes Craven had to like scrap stuff left and right and like stitch things together awkwardly. But there was apparently much more of a like really interesting arc to everybody's character in the first draft. I would love to read that at some point.
Yeah, because I really would like to know more about Arcane in this movie, other than that he's just really has it in for this guy.
But I love the production value of his like crazy cave with this like spring that leads you magically to the swamp, and all like his laboratory looked pretty cool, and he's got this giant party room with massive murals on the walls and everything. So there's production value here. It's just all saved for certain locations.
I would really like to see the Ray Wise footage that they did for this. I've never seen any of it. You know, I don't want to say hashtag release the Ray Wise cut,
but I just did.
But I just did. I would love to see that footage just to see
because apparently
what they did.
Craven said they shot like
I think the whole
back
movie.
to back, like almost the whole movie with both of them as the character, and they decided in post that they were going to go with the Dick Durock version of the character. But I actually really love the performance Dick Durock does in the second movie. Because he feels more like Superman in that second movie. He's a little bit more like he's humble, he's serious, he has a sense of humor, but he doesn't make the jokes. But and then they let Heather Locklear just like run circles around him with the comedy. She's the comedic relief, and he's endlessly amused by her. And it's like a really cute chemistry that they have in that movie. But he's just got this like, every time he smiles, it's like this beautiful set of bright white teeth when he's like smiling through this swamp face.
He's this great action hero type character, except he's just all swampy.
Yeah, but he's like so like humble and perfect and just trying to do everything right and save the day, and it's a fun character. I don't know that I cared at all about Swamp Thing before I started like watching all this stuff and researching all this stuff, but I actually really like him as a character.
Yes, you become one of us.
You've converted me.
I always thought that this movie was a hard R.
Oh, okay.
Like, I think that
did you grow up in Europe?
I think I was probably thinking of the Toxic Crusader.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, like I think I thought, oh, big green guy, you know, because I was a kid, you know, like big hulking green guy. It's pretty much the same thing.
It just got conflated in your head.
Yeah. And so, like, you know, when I was getting ready to sit down and watch this, and I saw it was PG.
Yeah.
I know. Obviously, it was before PG-13. But
the version you guys watched definitely was PG. So
yeah. But I don't even know if this would be considered PG-13 by the modern ratings. I still probably think it would probably be PG. There's really not much violence.
The worst thing that happens is David Hess's death.
Yeah.
And even then, it's like
it
not
cut
that
away
brutal when you're watching it and you see blood afterward, but that's it.
It's a cartoony death more than anything else.
And otherwise people are just being thrown into water. that's the most intense.
It's like the least you could do, really.
Yeah.
Like, other than just leave them on the boat and just go bye.
Yeah. Which I think would have been cooler, just like leave the guy on the boat and just send it crashing into the other boat.
Yeah, that would be better. Yeah.
Just take some more snakes out of your pockets.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Drop them in the boat.
I don't know why I keep picking these things up.
But I was really underwhelmed with the Swamp Thing costume, as we've talked about. I was like, it just looks like he's in a big rubber suit.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem very viney.
That's what bothers me the most is when there's a complete lack of detail, when it's like a mid shot and it's just a color. It's not even, there's not even stuff stapled to it.
I feel like it almost wished it had been more like a ghillie suit.
Sure.
Like just something like very drapey. Even just like having stuff hanging off his arm. Like the underside of his arms could be roots, and the upper parts could be more leaves. Like I don't know. Like it just needed. I know he needs to be able to move around.
Yeah.
And he needs to be able to throw punches.
It also needs to cost $8. So figure it out, Richard.
Yeah.
Yeah. At the end of the film, or at the end of the final battle, Wes Craven points out that as Swamp Thing's sort of kneeling down to set Cable down, you can see a tear in the back of Swamp Thing's costume.
You see his leg through it.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you see his leg, but there's a tear there, I guess, that he points out.
That's funny.
Yeah, so this costume took a beating.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, you're marching around in the water with it. We talked about the humanoid costumes, how those things fell apart before the end of the movie.
Well, and I just think about like the people in like the Godzilla costumes.
Sure, yeah.
So I imagine getting that thing weighs a certain amount out of the water, but when they want you to be in the mud and in the water, the thing it starts filling up.
Well, that's like, remember the Zat costume? Mm-hmm. And he was literally scuba diving in that thing because it was the head was built in the shape that he could have like the respirator inside the mask. And it's just insane that they let someone go underwater like that.
It sounds so claustrophobic. It just freaks me out.
But yeah, big thumbs up for me.
Yeah, I'm good with thumbs up.
Yeah, it's a thumbs up. I had a good time.
I think I would give it a thumbs up too.
I would hope so. I think that's why you came back, was specifically to give it a thumbs up.
I wouldn't have nagged you incessantly if I didn't want to get this a thumbs up.
I wanted to get 4. They need a guest for that one. I might as well show up. And then where do we have this ranked on our Letterboxd, guys?
I have it at 13 out of 28. It is below Over the Edge, but above Vice Squad.
I have it at 9th place. It's in my top 10. Puts it below Barbarossa, but above The Border.
Okay. I have it in 6th. That's just under Cannery Row and just above Quest for Fire.
Okay. I don't have a letterbox, but when I was last here, I established my own sort of little scale.
Right, yes.
Where the bottom is, of course, Aragon, worst film ever made.
Yes. And the top is Spirit, I believe?
Well, the middle the middle is Indiana Jones and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Okay.
The true neutral of movies.
Sure.
And the top is inarguably Frank Miller's The Spirit from 2008. Now, when I was last here, I put Heavy Metal in the top half. Now, Swamp Thing, in a shocking upset, I would put just below Heavy Metal.
Okay.
I actually I think Heavy Metal a little bit more. I think it holds together a little bit better.
I think
as an entertaining movie. Not to say I don't like Swamp Thing. Of course, I like the Swamp Thing movie, but I think if I were being taken out to be executed, and I was given 2 movies to watch as my last film,
were these 2?
I would. These are the only 2 movies we have in our prison library. I would probably pick Heavy Metal.
All right,
but when you have me back in a couple of decades for Return of Swamp Thing,
yes.
I will put that above Heavy Metal, just as a spoiler.
Okay.
Okay.
Our writer-director here was Wes Craven. So far, we've seen his work on Last House on the Left and Deadly Blessing. Between the 2, he helmed The Hills Have Eyes. And his first feature after this was The Hills Have Eyes Part 2. The same year, he directs one of his most celebrated films, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and later Deadly Friend, Serpent and the Rainbow, Shocker, The People Under the Stairs. And then his career has a second wind in 1996 with Scream, for which he would return to direct the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th installments. Immediately after this, Craven was considered by Golan Globus to helm their Superman sequel, The Quest for Peace, and later he was considered on the way to Burton for the 1989 Batman film because of Uslane's connection and having used him on this to a movie that he was proud of, at least. Craven sadly passed away from brain cancer in August of 2015. The writing credit here goes to Len Wein. He's best known in the comic world for co-creating Swamp Thing for DC and Wolverine for Marvel. He's also had a hand in reviving the X-Men comics, where Wein also co-created Nightcrawler, Storm, and Colossus. And then he later collaborated with Alan Moore, editing the celebrated series The Saga of the Swamp Thing, and followed Moore to editing work on Moore's magnum opus The Watchmen. Wein also appears on screen in X-Men Days of Future Past as Congressman Davis. The other writing credit, other than Craven's, obviously, and Wein's, is for Bernie Wrightson, who, beyond co-creating Swamp Thing with Wein, Wrightson also played an important part in another 1982 comic adaptation involving a mutant plant man by drawing the comic adaptations of Stephen King's horror anthology Creepshow, wherein Stephen King himself cameos as the man turning into
grass,
a plant creature after an asteroid lands on his farm.
Yeah. I love that one.
Beyond other Swamp Thing character credits, he also has art department credits in Ghostbusters, The Mist, and we've discussed his work on the show previously during your previous appearance because he also created the Captain Stern character for Heavy Metal Magazine, which was then adapted into the segment of the same name in Heavy Metal's anthology film in 1981.
What was this thing you always said? Is like, I have an angle?
I've got an angle.
Ween and Wrightson did reunite for an issue of the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror comic book.
That's awesome.
Where they did a Simpsons parody of Swamp Thing.
Oh, did they really?
Yes, they did.
What was that one called? Do you remember?
I don't remember the name of it, unfortunately.
I'll have to include a clip of it here because that's amazing.
Well, it's a comic book.
Oh, it's a comic book.
It's not from the
I thought you were
cartoon.
saying from the show. Yeah.
No, it's from the Treehouse of Horror comic book.
Oh, that's awesome. Didn't Amanda's dad used to write for the Simpsons comics?
Yeah, I have a couple.
Yeah. What do you got?
Squish Thing.
Squish Thing. That's what it's called for the Simpsons. Okay.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
The music here was from Harry Manfredini. We've heard his work previously in Friday the 13th Parts 1 and 2 and The Children. He's back later this season for Friday the 13th Part 3, 3D. And later, Friday the Final Chapter, The Hills Have Eyes 2, Friday A New Beginning, House, Friday Jason Lives, House 2, Deep Star 6, which is not the sixth installment of the Deep Star series.
Like Leonard Part 6?
Right. House 3, House 4, My Boyfriend's Back, Jason Goes to Hell, Wishmaster, and Jason X. The best Jason movie. The cinematographer here was Robbie Greenberg. We saw his work recently lighting Butcher Baker Nightmare Maker, and he's back this season to light Time Walker. Later, he lights The Milagro Beanfield War, Free Willy, Under Siege 2, Fools Rush In, Snow Day, Save the Last Dance, The Santa Claus 3, and Wild Hogs. The editor here was Richard Bracken. He previously edited the Rich Man, Poor Man TV miniseries, and so far on the show, Deadly Blessing, and later he cuts The Hills Have Eyes 2, and then mostly TV movies, including 5 or 6 Power Rangers TV movies. Louis Jourdan played Arcane. He has credits in French films back to the late 30s. In the 50s, he transitioned to a lot of American television work, and then features. He was Gaston Lachelle in Gigi. He also narrates Irma la Douce. We'll see him again next season as Kamal Khan in Octopussy. Of course, he returns as Arcane in The Return of Swamp Thing in 1989. And then his final credit was as Philippe in Year of the Comet. Sadly, his son passed away at age 29 during the production of this film from a drug overdose.
Yeah, they a couple of the actors mentioned, or Craven might have mentioned it, I think, Reggie Batts, who you'll mention in a moment, who played Jude.
Yeah.
He was cordial on set, but when he was done filming, he just went back to his trailer or whatever because his son had just passed away.
Yeah.
So he was not in the greatest mood, as you would imagine.
I'm glad he was still willing to come back for the second one, though, after that.
Yeah, he was very professional, but just not up to shenanigans on set.
Right, that makes sense. Adrienne Barbeau played Alice Cable. This is her 4th feature film appearance, and we've covered them all now. The Fog, Escape from New York, and The Cannonball Run before this. At the time, she was probably best known for 127 appearances as Carol Trainer on Maude. She's back later this season for Creepshow, meaning she appears in both of the Bernie Wrightson-inspired comic adaptations of horror films in 1982 featuring an unwilling plant man. And, amusingly, both films were adapted into a reboot series in 2019, and both of those reboots brought Adrienne Barbeau back for cameos.
Yeah, I think the Creepshow one, she's married to Hal Holbrook.
Oh, is she? That's great.
And like he's got like a thing in a box and he's trying to kill her with it.
Yeah, in the Swamp Thing one, it's one of the last episodes of the season, and she's like an executive at the CDC, and she's like one of the people that's pulling pranks on them and keeping them away from their evidence and stuff like that, making their lives difficult.
She was also in the Cowboy Bebop reboot.
Right, yeah, I was going to mention that. Later this season, she's also uncredited in The Thing as the voice of the chess computer before McCready just like dumps his drink out in it. She provides more uncredited voices in Demolition Man and Judge Dredd, and she returns to DC as the voice of Catwoman / Selena Kyle, and even an appearance as Martha Wayne in Batman the Animated Series. She was married at the time, obviously, to director John Carpenter, and like Richard said, she just showed up in Cowboy Bebop for one episode, apparently.
Yeah, and oddly enough, she's like an environmentalist who's got like a formula to turn people into plants.
Oh, there you go. The perfect connection. Ray Wise played Dr. Alec Holland. After this, he appears in Cat People and later RoboCop, on the way to perhaps his best-known role, that of Leland Palmer, father of Laura Palmer, in David Lynch's Twin Peaks. More recently, he's been in some Tim and Eric stuff, and he's the Secretary of State in X-Men First Class. He's also Robin Sr., the father of Robin Scherbatsky on How I Met Your Mother. It's funny that he named his daughter Robin, and so he is Robin Sr. He was also recently Marvin in 91 episodes of Fresh Off the Boat, and Commissioner Gordon in the 2016 Batman the Killing Joke animated feature. David Hess played Ferret. We saw him last for his feature film debut in The Last House on the Left. We've also discussed that he wrote the music for that film, which is then reused in Cabin Fever and Hateful Eight. He also directed the first horror film we ever covered on the show, To All a Good Night, directed by David Hess, Ferret here. Nicholas Worth played Bruno. We saw him last as the Maniac in Don't Answer the Phone. He's back next as the Reaper in The Hills Have Eyes 2. He's in a MacGyver episode, and he's Paulie in Darkman.
That's what I like. When I recognized him from this movie, I was like, what do I know this guy from?
That's it. Dick Durock played Swamp Thing. He has lots of stunt credits. We've seen him so far in The Nude Bomb, Coast to Coast, Any Which Way You Can, and History of the World Part 1. He's in Raw Deal and Stand By Me, on the way to reprising the role of Swamp Thing in Jim Wynorski's 1989 sequel, The Return of Swamp Thing. And beyond that, he starred in 72 episodes of the 1990 Swamp Thing TV series. Ben Bates played Arcane Monster. I don't know which one.
I think.
The one that he turns into, maybe.
Well, either that or the Bruno.
He turns into.
Yeah, because the other one's called Little Bruno.
Okay,
yeah. He does turn into that sword wielding monster. At the
must
end.
Be that guy. We saw him last as Big Ben in Ruckus and Ranger Post in The Legend of the Lone Ranger. And I'm pretty sure Ben Bates actually passed out on set in that costume because it didn't have a lot of breathing room in it.
I would not blame him. I think that costume also is another example of the costume being made for somebody else.
Sure, probably.
And then he had to fit himself into it.
Yeah. Nannette Brown played Dr. Linda Holland. Her only other credit was 11 years later as a reporter in My Boyfriend's Back. Reggie Batts played Jude. He doesn't have any other credits other than something called Hey Jude, which is like a short doc about him and his appearance in this film.
He is delightful.
Yeah.
He talks about in that particular short that both Adrienne Barbeau and Nicholas Worth came to his mother's house because they lived in the area.
Oh, okay.
It came to his mother's house for dinner.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so they were very friendly.
Next, we have Mimi Craven, was Arcane's secretary. She's credited as Mimi Meyer, her name at the time. This was her first film. Wes Craven had her as a flight attendant on the way to Charleston for this shoot, and he was so taken by her that he offered her the role of Arcane's assistant and then later married her. She comes back for Irreconcilable Differences, Nightmare on Elm Street. She also shows up on Seinfeld, Silk Stockings, Star Trek Voyager as Jisa, and episode Dragon's Teeth. Dove Gottsfield played Commando. We saw him last as a doctor in Chuck Norris' vehicle An Eye for an Eye. Tommy Madden played Little Bruno, and he's credited as One-Eyed Midget in the Muppet Movie. Who would that be, Jess? You're the Muppet Movie expert.
I don't know.
I don't know either. Sheb Woolley is credited as Screaming Thug. Archival sound on IMDb.
It's got to be the Wilhelm scream.
It is the Wilhelm scream.
Yeah, okay.
And it's not even for sure him, but I'm not going to go through all his credits. He was a very mainstay of the Western genre, and he has hundreds of credits, but he's literally included here for the stock use of the Wilhelm scream, which is sometimes credited to him and not even officially confirmed by anybody. I think that's everything for Swamp Thing. If you have any thoughts you'd like to share, you can find all our socials at linktree/vintagevideopod. If you enjoy what we're doing, consider giving us a review on iTunes. I don't believe it helps visibility, but it's good for morale. And if you really like the show, maybe you should join our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/vintagevideopodcast. What's that sound?
We got one!
That's right, it's a new patron, Forever Alone Cooking. As a $5 patron of the show, Forever Alone Cooking now has access to 53 full-size 70s reviews and a hand in choosing next month's film. Patrons are currently choosing between the following 12 titles: 99 and 44 100% Dead, Amazing Grace, The Black Godfather, Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, California Split, The Castaway Cowboy, Confessions of a Police Captain, Dead of Night, The Girl from Petrovka, Harry and Tonto, Macon County Line, and Newman's Law, each of which will be celebrating their 50th anniversaries in the month of August.
Now, as a member of the Patreon myself, I can verify everything he said. It's a great thing to be a part of.
Very cool. What have you enjoyed from the Patreon episodes? Do you
My
listen to all
favorite,
those?
yes, my favorite one. I've listened to them all.
Oh, okay.
My favorite one is the Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory episode.
I actually listened to that one a lot too.
That's
a
a
long
good one. It's a long one. Lots of details.
Yeah, I think we did like 3 hours because I keep dipping back into the story of the the version that has the side characters. Who is it? It's Tom and Jerry, the dumb animated version that they did. Do you want to talk a little bit about your work here in Camarillo and what it is you do? We'll obviously put a link to your work in the Twitter post for the episode.
Oh, sure. I am a comic book store owner. I own Sterling Silver Comics here in Camarillo, California. You can visit my website at sterlingsilvercomics.com, and my links to my other social media and such can be found there. My personal site is Mike Sterling's Progressive Ruin, which is my 20-year-plus comics book blog. And you can find that at progressiveruin.com, and you can find links to my socials and stuff there as well. And you can also go to mikesterling.com, which has links to everything I've done or done in the past. And
cool.
And all the evidence of my wrongdoings can be found there.
If you have any lingering Swamp Thing questions after this 2-hour-plus episode, you can forward them along to him, and he'll have all the answers for you.
Oh, boy.
And folks can order stuff from the store online, right?
Oh, they can, yeah. You can send me an email or contact me online or however you want, and I'll be happy to ship comics to you wherever you're at. If they'll take my mail, I'll send it to you.
All right. On that note, thanks so much for listening. I hope you'll join us next time when we'll be discussing Evil Speak, which IMDb describes like so. An outcast military cadet taps into a way to summon demons and casts spells on his tormentors through his computer. We'll leave you now with the trailer for Evil Speak, starring Clint Howard in the lead.
Sounds so good.
Everyone's known a boy like Stanley Coopersmith. Evil Speak. He's the kid everyone used to pick on.
Screwed up for the last time, Cooper Dick.
Evil Speak. You see, everyone thought Stanley was a joke. An outcast with no one to turn to.
You guys broke my catapult. You're gonna pay for that.
No one except man's most advanced machine. Stanley used the power of man to call on the powers of evil.
I, Stanley Coopersmith, command you! Oh my God.
And all hell broke loose.
Imbue these creatures with your strength and force. Let them avenge me.
Speak. Remember that little kid you used to pick on? Well, he's a big boy now.